1112, Our Place, which is pages 25 to 28 in your docs, and I just drew your attention to option 4, which is the same as the draft AP. Councillor Arbery.
So I'm prepared to move option 2.
Excuse me. Option 2 is to support the continuation of Our Place operation and the incorporation of the remaker proposal.
Could I ask a question of the Chief Executive before we speak to it? And before
Indeed, can I just get a
it?
second? Seconded by Councillor Hughes, I beg your pardon. Yes, indeed.
If, for the purposes of avoiding an amendment that may get kind of difficult to draft, could we send a signal that was acceptable, Chief Executive, if we pass this, that staff would understand that we would like to see discussions occur with Remaker and Chris and Rochelle Duffy, that as much of this money, this grant money, is directly transferred to the container hire, Royal Wolf, so that there's no risk in the future of those things not being paid and ending up coming back to us with a problem within the next 2 years, given that the amount in option 2 is more than what the month or the annual lease of those containers is. But rather than try and draft that in a complicated way, that staff would simply go away and do their best to work out a deal.
Yeah, perhaps I might defer to Gareth here, but my sense is that we need to understand from an organisation perspective what we now need to do to advance this proposal. I don't think it's as simple as just dedicating $160,000 to a particular outcome or delivery vehicle. We'd need to understand what that was and actually what, other than just the $160,000 of ongoing support is as well, because invariably what we found is that money just isn't sometimes enough. There's a whole lot of other levers that they rely on us for. But ultimately, if we entered into an agreement, then potentially we could take on directly the lease of those containers. I think we need to now understand what this means. If council wish to pursue option 2, but I'll defer to you, Gareth.
Through the chair, I think that an indication from council on the direction that you wish to go would be useful, and then if as part of that one of your deliverables was the fact that we reduced the chance of getting back into debt with Royal Wolf, we could look to structure an arrangement with John and Jackie and Our Place, and I don't know what that looks like, to ensure that that didn't happen. And that could mean, like Marty said, we took on the lease directly, but I think it's something we need to unpack, because obviously you've got some people that are going to pay community rates for a container hire, and you've got some people that are paying a commercial rate because they're running a bit, so it'd involve a bit of three-way conversation between all relevant parties. But I think if the outcome you were after was reducing the chance to get back into a debt position with the Royal Wolf, we could look to reflect a future arrangement that delivered on that.
I just have a supplementary before Heidi has another question, but we want to, for my benefit, we want to make it clear that this is a grant to Remaker. This is not a grant to the business of Our Place, that this is to a different entity which they have now put together and are coming to us, which is of a more social, charitable nature, which doesn't compete with the other food and beverage entities and so on in town.
Yeah, I think we could reflect that in an arrangement.
Thanks very much, Gareth. Heidi.
I'd just like to also think that we didn't get too, that we were able now to not get too involved on a staff level in council, that we were able to just say that operation is doing their thing, and we're now letting them roll.
We'd like to think that too,
Yeah.
and we thought that was the case 3 years ago, but ultimately it hasn't worked out like that. My sense is that there will still need to be ongoing conversation. Yeah, it'd be nice to be able to structure it like that, but my sense is that ongoing support in some sense will be needed, but manageable, I imagine.
And Councillor Kitty.
Just so that the public are aware, can we please know what the staff recommendation was for this particular project, please?
Our recommendation is
We said before, through this report, there's not staff recommendations. It's for you to consider the submissions.
Supplementary from the draft.
In the
plan.
draft, it was
closure.
well, the option 4 was the same as the draft AP. Sorry, option, as you're reading it on your green sheets, option 4 was that which was,
It was voted by staff rather than, that was voted by elected members rather than staff.
it was voted by elected members. That option 4 is what is currently in the draft AP.
So, Jeremy, the staff recommendation in the report that went up as part of the draft LT annual plan, there was, what page is that referenced on? Page 25 talks about what, at that point, what the staff recommendation was.
Councillor Arbery, did you want to talk to the motion?
Yes. So I think we're all aware that our place was a temporary measure until council decided what we wanted to build on that site. And we're still a number of years away from starting construction. So for me, it doesn't make sense to decommission a site before we know what we're going to do there and take away some of the vitality that it brings to the city centre. So looking through the submissions, we had just over 5,500 people sign a petition to keep our place. So for myself, even if it was going to cost a little bit more than the $160,000 that was requested, if it was an ongoing commitment for 3 years or whatever that time frame is between now and us knowing what we want to do with the site, I think that's a good investment, certainly better than some of the other things we're spending our money on, like hanging baskets, for example. I think it's also important to realise that we're pivoting from a commercial / some social enterprise to a largely social enterprise with the Remaker Hub. And by us supporting this anchor tenant, that takes a lot of the uncertainty around container hire and the, I suppose, the operational costs that haven't been met out of the equation. So, yeah, I'll be obviously voting in favour, and I'll look forward to my right of reply based on the discussion we have.
Thank you. Councillor Hughes.
Yes, I'm really in support of this project. Also want to acknowledge the over 5,500 people that submitted on this. And it's really a demographic of people that we really want to encourage and support into our city centre to bring vibrancy back. I just want to read out some of the free events that happened at our place, because I think it's, we do hear, we don't actually hear of a lot of these things because they fly under the radar, but You're the Bomb, the Whitaker's Our Place, Learn the Art of Japanese Floral Display, Finding Beauty in the Exhibitions, Sonic Delusion, Anything Goes album release, Queen's Birthday at Our Place, Golden Balls pop-up, Toi Ohomai pop-up market, One Day pop-up, Stitch and Bitch, Photo Juice, Say Cheese, Barbecue Classic, Hawaiian Feast, Winter Warmers with Our Place, Sly and Company Pop-Up, Paddington End, Lease for Sale, Little Trooper, Free Kids Workshop, Peace Day celebrations, Extreme Knitting, Crop Swap, the list goes on. It's a really cool community space, and it does meet the needs of a lot of people. We've got a university here now. We're about to see the start of a student accommodation come in, and this is just the kind of place that spins the wheels of that crowd. Also, really excited about Remaker Space. It sets us on a path to looking at sustainability in all sorts of different ways, and really inclusionary ways. I really like the track record that John and Jackie bring through their work in Good Neighbour, an incredible startup that they brought into something that now continues on, and this is the start of their new project. Really like to support them in that. Also want to really acknowledge that the commercial end of Our Place do pay commercial rents, so the food and beverage will be paying commercial rents as is outlined in the information that we have. So, yep, in full support. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hughes. Councillor Robson, followed by Councillor Cloud.
Yeah, I've wrestled with this one because the 5,500 submissions, I think sometimes when you get that type of approach, it's quite reflexive, like it's a good thing, but these people may not have done the sort of analysis that we're being asked to do. I think the biggest concern that I have is de-risking this thing going forward. If we think about our role as strategy and risk, this is a tactical initiative, but the previous, if you like, iteration of this or version of this, we didn't properly de-risk it, nor do I think we went into it fully with our eyes open. It was a learning experience, so let's learn from that. I think if we're to go forward with the Remaker situation, we do need to be very, very clear what we're up for and what the costs are. I think this is the point the Chief Executive is making. We're not in a situation to know that at the moment. And that gives me pause. The corollary, however, is that the decommissioning, should we decide to not proceed, there is a decommissioning cost and you can't hide it. And I am not so naive as to believe that if we decommission Our Place, there will instantly be pressure on to put something there. And so when we're looking at options here, if we're doing a proper options analysis, what we have to understand is it's not between having what's proposed there with the Remaker anchor tenant option, I think that's a good way of describing it, and no expense. There will be pressure, there will be staff reports for what people see as an opportunity to do something with that space. And I think we are naive to believe that that's not the case. This is not a choice between spending X a year and not spending. It's a choice between spending X a year on a known proposition for a known demographic that's showing a strong interest in this place existing versus something else that we haven't yet anticipated or put our minds to, but will come along. And it's on that basis, and making a very, very clear statement about that whatever staff do here, they have to come back to us with a very clear understanding, a very clear communication of what we're up for and the risks around it, that I'm prepared to go with the proposal.
Thank you very much. Councillor Morris, followed by Councillor Cloud.
Thank you. I speak in opposition to the motion. I think what would really spin the wheels of our retailers in downtown would be provision of parking on that site. I think that's what is needed. There is a cost to that and may not even wash its face. But in terms of adding vibrancy, you need people, you need to add customers, and you need to add customers that may not be competing with existing businesses in downtown. So, and that goes for events too, in terms of event spaces and the various bars and what have you. So that is what's needed. That's what should have happened a few years ago, in my view, and that's my view.
Councillor Cloud.
Yeah, I'm convinced that there is significant community support for Our Place. It has been well attended, it has been well supported. through events and the offerings that are there, food and beverage, etc. And I think it does bring added vibrancy to the CBD, which I think we all understand is absolutely vital. I think John and Jackie Payne are very reputable operators. They've had a history of success in the social enterprise space, as Councillor Heidi Hughes alluded to, particularly with Good Neighbour. It certainly ticks the sustainability box, and I think that's important going forward. And I do concur with Councillor Robson in that if we were to decommission that space, there would be pressure to put something else in there, and if it was a car park, as mooted by Councillor Morris, there would be significant capex associated with that. If I remember rightly, it was $200,000 or $300,000. So again, you add that on to the decommissioning costs, and it's significant. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Councillor Hollis, followed by Councillor Kitty.
Yeah, thanks for that. And I too am torn on this. It does provide a place for young artists and things to perform as well. However, this was started as an activation for downtown, and had the 5,000 people who submitted to a petition spent the cost of 1 or 2 coffees a month in the area, then council wouldn't be forced to have to spend money topping up. And I think that that's something to bear in mind. If the activation worked, then business would be doing better, and it seems that it is doing worse. Perhaps if we had set it up as a community centre, or in fact look at setting up a community centre that is based on some containers and a stage setup, then it might be worth investing some money every year for the community, but it was not set up that way. It was set up specifically to activate. It did not work, and it probably should be closed one way or another.
Councillor Kitty.
Thank you. I too absolutely love the idea of some of the events that are happening at our place, okay, especially the community events. But I do think that our place is situated in the wrong area, and primarily because of the other businesses on the Strand and in downtown that are seen to be competing with us. They pay a lot of money to have their businesses down here. We are struggling. We are coming out of COVID. We still are unaware of what is going to happen come October and November. I really want to see us supporting the downtown business sector, okay, and not our place. Our place has got a place, but not exactly where it is. I'm also concerned that obviously the staff recommendation on the original executive recommendation, number 107, option 1, was a permanent closure of the Our Place site. I do trust that the staff have worked for years and years on this, and they wouldn't have said that lightly. Again, I like the idea of Our Place, not where it is, not competing with the other businesses in this time where we need to be supporting all the other downtown Tauranga main businesses that have been around for years and that are really struggling.
Thank you. Councillor Border.
I like Our Place, and I like it where it is. It's done something very good for the city, but as Councillor Robson said, it has been a learning experience, and you know, hindsight's always a really good thing. When you look back, things you could have done better and so on. Its business model was based on 50% retail, which just never got off the ground. And we have to be honest, retail is in deep trouble, not just in the CBD. Someone I know very well was shopping in the Mount Main Street just recently, and two shops there were closing, partly because the landlords weren't offering them any rent relief, but others, just the customers have dried up. And there's another 2 since then we've heard of that are closing. And retail is a very challenging environment right now. So it's good that we're moving into something that's not a business model based on simply food and beverage and so on and retail, but this social community thing of Remaker, which I think is what we are granting to, and not to prop up some beverage and retail in competition with others in the city. I believe it'll do more for the city centre than the hanging baskets ever would. And there's 79,000 of the budget which can be allocated to this. There's no question that lots of people do come to town for this purpose. They've told us so in that submission. in the petition, but in submissions too. Young people are coming. We want young people here. They don't have money to spend in the retail outlets, so that, but they come and they provide vibrancy for the city, and people attract people, I think. So I hope we do keep it going. It won't be there forever, but I agree with the other comments. Decommissioning it will lead to other things. There are big holes underneath it, and for those who don't know, the lift shafts from the previous building, there's things that will take money to fix, even if you were making it into a car park. And car parks are not going to save the city. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yeah, Councillor Arbery.
Yeah, just doing my right of reply. Right of reply is a bit of an odd thing because everyone's stated their position already, so, I'd hope someone would be open to changing their mind, but you never know. So from a purely a ratepayer's perspective, if you look at the options in front of us, we're looking at doing something temporary until we develop the site. So if we decommission for $200,000 to make this site safe, that's 200 grand of OPEX, which then, if you convert into a car park, that's that extra $500,000, which may be around for, say, 5 years, or, depending on how long it takes to put a building there. But then you're destroying that capital and destroying that asset to put a building there, or whatever the case might be. So it's not a very efficient use of resources in my mind. And in terms of some of the objections around competing with the existing businesses, I mean, I'm just looking through some of these comments. So Kelly says, at this time we should be supporting our artisans, not shutting them out. We have Tanya from Kaaraha who submitted and said, we have a meal for the homeless there every year during Christmas. So this isn't a pub where people only go to have a beer in direct competition with bars down the road. This is somewhere you can bring your kids, you can have family days, you can have family events, and this is actually where I met my first councillors. Met Terry Malloy down there during the mayoral debates, and I was down there with some friends watching the live stream. So it's a place for events, and it's a different offering, particularly if we transition to a waste sort of eco hub that is the Remaker proposal. That's not in competition with the existing businesses. That's a social enterprise, and a social enterprise that's better off for the ratepayers, particularly if John and Jackie can deliver on their promises to become self-sustaining as the anchor tenant there temporarily. So for me, it ticks the boxes on all fronts, and I think there's just over 5,500 people. I thought I would read out some of these comments for my 5 minutes, but I'm sure everyone's already seen the overwhelming number of comments that people have already submitted through the petition.
Thank you very much, Councillor Arbery. Council, I'm putting to you then option 2, which is the support the continuation of our place under the circumstances of the Remaker proposal. All those in favour, please say aye. Can I see a show of hands, please? That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And all those against? Any abstentions? The motion is carried. Which leads us... Sorry, just bear with me 2 seconds. On to H. Yep. Right. Yes, indeed. H, I, J and K. Sorry, just bear with me 1 second, please, Council.
Page 9.
Resolutions H and I are just notes, really. So there have been a number of the resolutions that you've passed that are savings that you're looking to bring back in the following year. So just noting that has a financial consequence. So in the year 1 of LTP, if everything stayed the same, there would be an increase in rates to bring those temporary reductions back into base budget. Those were obviously the decision you make at the time, but just we want to make it really clear so you understood the consequence of the decision. And then which is really the conversation that was had at the beginning of this meeting, that all of these resolutions are setting the quantum of the rates, not how that quantum is allocated between commercial and residential ratepayers. That's subject of a secondary report. So that's all that H and I do.
I'm happy to move H, I, J and K.
Thank you, Councillor Cloud. Can I have a seconder for that, please? Councillor Arbery, thank you very much.
Just before I speak to it, I'd like to ask a question in terms of J. What is the likely year-end rate surplus which would then be transferred to the risk reserve?
Through the chair, still being worked through, but current estimates around $500,000.
Thank you. So, look, in speaking to it, these are mainly just notes of decisions that we've already agreed to. I certainly favour the placement of any surplus into a risk reserve. We know we've got significant expenditure and liabilities coming up in the future, so it's prudent that we put that to the risk reserve, the $500,000 thereabouts. And then, of course, we also know that the allocation of the total increase in budget is going to be determined through the differential discussion and also the UAGC discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Arbery.
Well, I don't think this needs too much discussion. I think it's just noting the consequences of some of the decisions we've made and outlining the process that we're going through and agree on the risk reserve. I think that's prudent.
Very much. Any other comments? Councillors Hollis? Councillor Hollis. Robson.
If possible, could we take this by parts? And I
Can.
have a question.
We can indeed, if you wish. Councillor Robson.
Yes. I'd like to move an amendment, please. The amendment is effectively to J, and basically I'd like to delete J. And I don't know whether that becomes a direct opposite. I'm happy to reword it, but basically the intent of the amendment is to not put the money in the risk reserve. That may in fact be a breach in the sense that it's a direct opposite, in which case, should this fail, and I hope it does in parts, I would move an alternative motion with regard to that surplus.
I would second that.
But it's your, the chair's call of whether he accepts an amendment or whether he feels it's a direct...
Yeah, it's a direct negative? Yeah.
We're voting in parts, Mr. Chair, so...
Well, we can vote in parts, but that is a direct negative. Okay. Happy to take it in parts, though. If Councillor Hughes.
I just need a little bit more explanation of the risk reserve, of that piece. Could
Risk reserve, Paul, thank you.
Sorry, can you just repeat that question? Sorry.
just want a bit more explanation about the risk reserve, please, in the context of this.
Sure. So risk reserve exists to fund, by definition, any unexpected events. Over the years, the bulk of it has been used to fund leaky home liability. Currently, it's actually sitting at quite a large negative balance. I can't remember the exact. It was north of negative 14 million. Subject to some of the large leaky home settlements that have recently occurred. What it does is put money into a reserve to allow for those unexpected events, so it's not just the burden of future ratepayers effectively. Now, the fact that it's in negative means it's not actually achieving that at the moment, and by default the offset is it's debt funded. So it brings our debt down in the interim, and the debt goes back up as it's paid out, but it's a way of collecting money off current ratepayers to fund existing and future risk.
Thank you.
Paul? Thank you.
I'll speak to it. It may raise a question that needs confirming from staff, but the three of them are straightforward. Just in speaking to Jay, I think I'll be inclined to vote against it. it is a policy anyway that surplus goes to risk reserve, I believe, and that may be confirmed by staff after I speak if I'm wrong, but I understood it's always our policy that any surplus every year goes to risk reserve. I'm happy for it in this occasion because it is, on this occasion because we are in a COVID budget and we now have the luxury, if I may use that word carefully, of the LGFA increased debt to revenue ratio, the need to put money there. I've always been a strong advocate for getting this risk reserve back on the right side of the balance sheet and putting money into it. But now that we have a little more headroom, anything's coming our way that we need to borrow for can be dealt with that way. And perhaps either we defeat it or we leave it on the table, because I wouldn't be opposed to having, let's say there is a 500,000 surplus, if it was only 400,000 that went in and we used that to pay, to support some of these things which are worthy projects. I'd rather see that done during this process rather than sticking to something that all the surplus goes straight into the risk reserve. So I'll probably vote against it at this point and see, and come back or lie on the table. Either one is a good option, I think, if we just parked it and then come back at the end of our deliberation.
Right, thank you, Councillor Hollis.
Strangely, I'm finding myself in agreement with Councillor Baldock. So what I'd like to think is that $500,000 is somewhere around 0.3%, and since we're mucking around with 0.1s and 0.2s, 0.3 seems to be a reasonable number to be able to put over the top of some of the projects that we're thinking about. So I would not like to see it going into the risk reserve.
Thank you. Are there any other comments? Councillor Robson.
To quote an old saw, if Councillor Baldock and Councillor Hollis agree on something, it behoves us all to listen.
Very good. Sorry, I was expecting a lot more. Council, I take it we have exhausted discussion on this, and I can therefore put it to the vote? In parts, I beg your pardon, yes, in parts. So we're voting firstly on H. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Abstentions and carried. On I, is there a discussion required on I, or we just putting it to the vote? Okay. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Abstentions and carried. Now, J. Councillor Robson. No, I think Councillor Robson was seeking an amendment to this. Is that? Well, it was a direct opposite, but I was wondering if you wanted to reword it in some way.
My understanding is it has a mover and a seconder, and we can't put an amendment in as a direct negative. And the options discussed by Councillor Hollis and Councillor Baldock suggest that this will probably fail, given the leadership roles both of them hold in our wonderful council, and then we can make a decision about where it happens next.
There is an option, though, I think, given that we're taking them in parts, for me to move a motion to this lie on the table, if there is a seconder, because that gives us more flexibility, I believe, at the end. Yeah.
Is it your wish that this lies on the table? All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? One recorded against. Abstentions and carried. Sorry, Paul.
Sorry, I just want to clarify a few things on the risk reserve, because just in reference to Councillor Baldock's the 500,000, that policy is no longer in place. So the current policy says that it's used against debt retirement, and council may make an election to put it to a risk reserve. Now, the net effect on debt is identical in the event that it goes to a risk reserve or it goes against debt. The only difference is that risk reserve can be used for future things, i.e. a drawdown back on debt again. So the fact that it's in negative means it really doesn't make a huge amount of difference. All it does is slightly improve our already very large negative balance if it's applied against the reserve, but it is used against debt as the fundamental point. Just want to make that one clear.
Just supplementary, to clarify my thinking, that if we leave it lie on the table, we're not faced with the issue of a 75% revocation later. We may come back and say, okay, 400,000 into risk reserve and this for that, and that would just leave us with those options. Is that correct?
Can I just ask a question of clarification of you, Paul? Like, can it be used for other things other than debt retirement?
I'm just looking at Jeremy because I think it would be a Section 80 change to policy if it was, because the policy says any surplus is going to debt retirement now.
Yes, by resolution of
Can do
council,
it,
you
but
can
it's a
do
Section
it.
80
Yes.
resolution, yes.
So it can be done. Okay, thank you. So I'll put to you then this lie on the table, if that's your wish, which is subparagraph J. All those in favour say aye. Against? Have we?
Yes.
Oh, have we? Okay, all right, jolly good. It's a miracle. K. So I put in K to you, council. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Abstentions? And carried. Very good. We're on to 10.2. Now, 10.2 appears, as you can read it, with the gaps that Jeremy has very kindly given us, with the 5 dots between his suggested breaks, which are pretty much at every numbered serial, actually, which makes life easy. Pages 54 to 105, starting with 1.2A1, pages 57 to 58, Afina House. Please note that option 2 is the same as in the draft AP.
Happy to move option 1.
Maybe the second option 1. Councillor Arby. Mr. Arby, would you like to speak to that?
Yeah, Fina House provides a crucial service for the most vulnerable women in our city, and they've now got a contract with MSD that covers about 2/3 of their funding, but they still need other funders to cover that shortfall. So this is temporary funding for a very good cause that has really good social outcomes, and in the future they'll be looking to get a larger contract from MSD. So this is probably going to come down in future years, but this is in terms of the difference that it makes to our community. This is a small contribution that gets leveraged across multiple other contributors and gets really good social outcomes. So absolutely in favour.
Thank you. And speaking to the motion myself, a number of us were at Afina last night celebrating their first birthday. They've managed to look after 50 women in that time, and their stays are up to sort of 90 days, of our most vulnerable, with an incredible success rate. As Councillor Arbery said, some 65% of their funding is now from central government, which is great, and the support to Afina Kit locks in wonderfully to Kāinga Tupu, the task force on homelessness. And just looking at the people that were there and the work that they do, this is a facility, a service, if you will, that's desperately needed in Tauranga Moana. And I just commend the work that all the women, they are all women, have done, supported by a number of men, of course, but really quite extraordinary. And we know that when, women have a strength in society, we are all okay. And I think it's really important that we get behind this. And I encourage you to think, despite the facts of the position that we're in financially, not having a Fina House operable at the level that they've been able to perform, I think would be very damaging to our community. Councillor Bulldog.
Yeah, I too support it, and was at the birthday party last night. It was a great event. Minister Andrew Little was there also, and I just think we, for a long time, had a men's shelter for many years, and we often sort of talked here about we needed a women's shelter. Councillor Malloy was definitely recognised last night for his part in that, as he often raised it in the chamber. We've only supported them for 1 year. In time, I believe they won't need our support, but to cut funding now is just far too soon. and they do. All the other things have been said. They're doing a great job with some very vulnerable people who are really getting a new chance at life. So I support it fully.
Thank you. Councillor Robson.
Having made a personal contribution to the setup and having celebrated my birthday, which is in a similar date to Athena House, by making an additional contribution to them, where I sit on this topic is probably pretty obvious. There's been a need for this institution for a long time. The work done by the team there, and Angela leading it to a certain extent, has been really, really valuable. I can't think of a much better place to put this type of resource.
Thank you. Anybody else? I'll put the motion to you then, Councillor, if there's no one else. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Abstentions? And carried. Thank you very much. To Kāinga Tupu, the Task Force on Homelessness. The option 2 was the same as the draft AP. I'd like to move from the chair option 1. And I have a seconder and the Deputy Mayor. Thank you very much. Councillor Robson, your mic is on.
Apologies.
Well, look, speaking to the submission, again, it's no different to Athena. We have an extraordinary amount of people who are working very hard, who have done considerable work historically in Tauranga on our ever-growing homelessness population. There is a suggestion by our team here that there are some 4,000 homeless people in the wider Western Bay, plenty defined in various ways, from the sharp end of the homeless despair that we see, being the rough sleepers, through to people who sleep in cars, the working poor, couch surfers, people who are constantly moving around various levels of accommodation. The Kāinga Tupu is not about taking over anyone's particular work. It is about bringing everybody together in a framework to provide future guidance on how we should move forward together, and most particularly to attract government funding. And I'm confident in times to come that will happen. In fact, I can tell you that there's a meeting with the Minister, I think, next week, maybe the week after, with a view to looking at funding Kāinga Tupu, with a view to resourcing it to a level where we can move forward, because it is critically important that we do so in a city of Tauranga's size and scale. But the homelessness issue we have here is profoundly worrying, deeply troubling for me when I see people on the streets. I'm an early morning dog walker, and I find it heartbreaking, quite frankly, to see the amount of homeless people sleeping in cars or living under hedges, or for those that go onto the Harbour Bridge every early in the mornings, living in the parapet, so to speak, in tents where they've got ladders up inside the bridge, literally. I just think it's dreadful. So I do hope you support this. Thank you. Councillor Salisbury.
Yes, I support this as well. I think there's been an incredible amount of work that's gone into creating the strategy from staff and providers right across the city and some of the government agencies. So I think we have an opportunity now to actually take a great strategy and turn it into some awesome action and implementation. So I support this strongly. And it's just, and kudos to everyone involved in that's been able to pull together such an incredible piece of work in the time frame that they've done. So I think we could probably see some actions fall out of this that will bring some incredible positive benefits to vulnerable people in our city.
Thank you very much. Councillor Clout. By Councillor Arby, followed by Councillor Morris.
Yeah, look, while I applaud the sentiments behind this, and I think, clearly we do have a massive homelessness issue in Tauranga, I just don't really feel that TCC and the ratepayer should be fronting up with $200,000. We've already supported many of the groups that actually help the homeless directly, and in my mind, adding an extra, staff member here at TCC is not really the best use of that money. So reluctantly, I'm going to vote against this because the other thing to consider is that part of that $200,000 could go directly to some of those people and organisations that did submit to us in the process. So reluctantly, I'll vote against it, and those are my reasons. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Arbery, and I think then Councillor Morris, as I recall.
Hopefully I can put some of your worries to rest, Councillor Clout. Kaingatupu has the advantage of being supported by the other funders in the city, so for every dollar that we put in, that gets leveraged and multiplied, and I think it's actually going to save the ratepayers quite a lot of money, especially compared to, say, a begging ban, which was an expensive legal battle that wasn't going to get good outcomes. And speaking to the staff member working on this, Jodie, she's doing an incredible job and has managed to pull the different people together, has pulled together a coherent strategy, is pulling the funders together, and we've got these working action groups that makes me actually feel quite positive about the future direction. So, I mean, some parts of the response to homelessness has been a bit siloed, and that's been recognised for many years amongst the homeless provider network, and that each person was looking after their patch, but having something that we can, I suppose, have a united front, so we can put our request to government for extra investment in this region that aligns with the national strategy on homelessness, I think puts us in a really strong position, and ultimately will actually attract more funding to the region, which is a good outcome for the ratepayers as opposed to a cost. So really, I think from a financial perspective, this makes absolute sense. But then from the social impact, this is an incredible difference. So obviously, we'll be voting strongly in favour, and we'll urge everyone else to do the same.
Thank you very much, Councillor Arbery. Councillor Morris.
Thank you. I support the quantum of funding moved. Just a question, because it is a Western Bay of Plenty homeless strategy, and Western Bay of Plenty District Council have adopted their 2021 annual plan already, or at least decided not to consult. So how much is in the budget from Western Bay of Plenty District Council towards this project, which of course started off being endorsed by Mayor Webber?
Yes, so Mayor Webber has endorsed it. They've given us staff support. They haven't given any money towards it, though. And I think it's one staff support member to it.
Yeah, I think the point made by Councillor Arbery is well remembered, that a somewhat punitive approach to dealing with issues that are largely not of council's making is a genuine waste of ratepayers' money. But a constructive approach to dealing with issues that are not largely of council's making, that may result in a better city, is actually one of the things we swore an oath to do, to create a better city. That being said, I'm happy to support this motion, but I would like to see us using the relationships that we have with central government to quietly, not whisper in the ears of certain ministers, but take certain ministers out the back of the bike sheds and remind them of their responsibilities they have to the people of New Zealand. You know, many of the problems we face are due to central government policies that they know will create these issues, or central government policies that underfund the services required to address the issues that their primary economic policies actually create. Some leaders in certain cities speak loudly in this space, and I would urge our mayor to, within wherever he's comfortable, do the same. Right? So I support the motion, but we should not be alone in this. Central government pick up the role. And my final point is, the thing that got me over the line on this particular strategy when I saw it was the acknowledgement, front, centre, top line, that unless central government provides housing for the people in this city who can't get homes, and I use the word deliberately, homes, in the current market, this strategy will mitigate but ultimately fail. Yeah. Central government must provide housing.
Indeed.
Vinny.
My advocacy, while not involving invitations to the bike sheds, either in front or behind, to any government minister, has been very strong. I will pass over to the Chief Executive now before I just take more questions, because Marty's just got a salient comment.
Thank you, Your Worship. So last week we were visited by a delegation from Wellington, and they have established if you like, a cross-government group called Caring for Communities, and they are in a process of engaging with local authorities, iwi and hapu, across the country on the basis that there are billions of dollars of unspent COVID recovery funds that haven't been accessed. And for example, the Ministry for Environment has a $1.1 billion fund, of only which $204 million has been allocated. And what they have done is they have consolidated the range of different funding streams that are engaging directly with communities now. And so this was one of the areas that we believed, and in discussion with them, that there was an opportunity to seek funding support for the program, along with a whole range of other things. We are proposing to Kulahui with the various iwi and hapu across Tauranga Moana to try and pull together what you might call a consolidated application framework where collectively there can be multiple initiatives, but essentially channeled through, if you like, a single application process, which is something that they've asked for. We're in the early stages of pulling this together, and I guess this is one stream of work that we would suggest that there would be funds available. Perhaps later in the deliberations we can talk a wee bit further about this, because ultimately it's like another CIP application process, and to be frank, we don't have the resources, time or energy given within the organisation, and we were looking to seek some external support to try and pull this, not only a council application together, but essentially a consolidated Tauranga application together. And so perhaps we can talk about that a wee bit later in deliberations.
Thank you, Marty. Gareth, do you want to comment on this at all?
Just, excuse me, just quickly, I think the advocacy on all levels on this particular strategy is working. We got notification yesterday that Minister Mahuta is here in August and has specifically asked to be briefed on this project. So, you know, the message is getting out there.
Is it August, is it?
I want to say 26, but I'm not sure.
Yes, sorry, I may have got it wrong when I said next week. I apologise. Thank you, Gareth. Questions continuing. Councillor Bulldog.
Debate we're going on with. Speaking to the motion. Yeah, I'll be supporting it. And I was, as I said earlier, at the Fina House last night, where the Mayor gave another very good speech about Kāinga Tupu, and he highlighted the fact that officials now understand the depth of our problem here with homelessness and housing. And I was standing very close to Minister Little, who nodded very noticeably that they are getting the message. It didn't require any discussion about wood sheds or bicycle sheds. And it's one of the reasons why I lie awake at night sometimes when I'm preparing for a smart growth meeting, that those kind of comments might not help. But I would like to raise right now the issue too, given that someone brought up something about a bylaw, which, you know, wasn't going to cost us a lot of money because we had a solution to it. But in that discussion, there was recognition that we have one or two enforcement officers on the streets, whereas Hamilton had 20, and there was a resolution passed there that we would look at ambassadors on the street, because I can only guarantee a few things. One of them death and taxes and so on. But when the funding stops and the homeless, the rough sleepers, are not in motels, they will be turning up back on the street. And it's something we still need to address if we want to support our retailers who have had to deal with that for a long, long time. But I'm certainly supportive of the strategy and the good things that can come from it. But I would just remind us that there is a real inequity in how many people we're putting on the street to deal with some of these very complicated issues that don't go away overnight.
Thank you, Councillor Baldock.
Please ask a question.
Yes, indeed.
Thank you. Can I just get clarification from staff in terms of the extra FTE? Councillor Arbery mentioned that we already have a person in this space. Can you clarify what the extra FTE is actually going to do?
It's not strictly a full replacement. So Jodie is spending a large part of her time working on this project, and the money is to backfill the rest of her role so that she can focus on delivering this over the next year. And that's why the amount's not necessarily equivalent to the value of an FTE. So it's basically to backfill the parts of Jodie's role that she currently can't deliver on.
Thank you very much. Councillor Morris, did you speak on this? You did. Thank you. That's all. Very good. Well, I'll put the motion to you, Council. All those in favour, please say aye. Might need a show of hands. Against? Abstentions? Carried. Thank you very much. Which leads us on to point number three. The grant fund, which appears on page 63-64. This is the grant funding to cover development contributions. And bullet point 4 of 3, unstated option 4, is the same as the draft AP. Thank you, Christine.
So we do get requests for development contribution waivers or non-payment by community groups. So the position that sits in the development contribution policy and has been the policy position of council is that we don't waive development contributions unless they meet the policy criteria, and that if council wishes to ease the financial burden, because those growth costs still sit there and that infrastructure still need to be funded, we don't want to change the integrity of the development contributions policy. But if there are groups that council wishes to support to reduce the financial burden of paying the development contributions, then that should be that way of a grant, and that grant then should be funded. So that's effectively what this is asking. So in this case, the Tauranga Community Housing Trust has asked for a grant on specific development. So you could choose to do that, or you could choose to put a quantum that then could be contestable or applied for by anyone who was doing community housing. So that would be an option, or not at all. So just so you've got the context of how it fits with the development contribution policy. So then the development contribution revenue would still be the appropriate quantum, and effectively a grant funding to fund that via rates.
Thank you very much, Christine. Councillor Baldock.
I didn't see it, but maybe it was there. But how much were they actually seeking, or how much would be their development contribution costs if it was 50%?
That is option 1.
We haven't seen the actual application yet, but the assessment is around about 75,000 for the full cost.
Yeah, I'm happy to move option 4.
I'll second that.
Thank you. Would you like to speak to that?
Yeah,
now?
just very briefly. And I mean, I don't want to be a Scrooge. I changed my mind on the last vote, but that's fine. I think my biggest concern here is that we would be setting a precedent, and there would be so many potential, good projects that would come to us knocking on the door saying, please forgive us or relieve us of the development contributions. And we know that that's a fundamental way of us funding our capital expenditure, which is significant in terms of particularly new housing developments. So that's why I will be proposing that we do decline this request. It's a little bit like GST, and if you start making exemptions for this and that, it just becomes very unwieldy. And so I'd like to keep this very simple and everyone knows where they stand on it.
Thank you. Councillor Bulldog.
Yeah, similar comments, but look, you'd be surprised how many people in the community think we make a profit out of development contributions, and even some people in the government think we do. And it's very difficult to get those amounts agreed to by developers. They have the option of challenging some of the way we compute it. So I don't favour ever trying to change it. We need to collect it. It's always accounted for. In fact, we end up, as Councillor Robson and I often mention, ratepayers have to pay extra there. So there are other ways to help them if we feel they need to, but at this time in our COVID budget, I don't support even helping them with that it's got to come from somewhere else.
Councillor Morris.
I oppose the a resolution that's on the table. But I do acknowledge that 3 years in to a Labor government, and we're having to have requests like this to forgive DCs. And I don't want to start sounding a bit like Neil Kinnock, but seriously, Labor government, and we're having, being asked to consider forgiveness of DCs for community housing. Government should be ponying up. That being said, this is a priority for me because this does affect people's lives much more than hanging baskets, much more than our place, much more than Elizabeth Street, much more than many things that are in our budget. So this is a priority for me, personally. So I do not support the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Arbery.
Yeah, I'll be speaking against this as well. If this was Kāngora asking for a discount, I'd say probably not. But, Tauranga Community Housing Trust, they're not a big enterprise and they need the support. So I see this in the same vein as the donation we've just made to Afina House. I think I see this in the same light.
Thank you. Anyone else? Councillor Hollis.
And now I find myself agreeing with Jaco, so it's a very interesting day.
Mr. Robson. Councillor Clout, thank you.
If there's no other speakers, just write a reply. Over the next sort of 10 years, we are hoping and wanting, perhaps thousands of social homes, social housing places to be built here in Tauranga. And, if we were to take this approach with all of them, there would be a massive hole left in our capital expenditure in terms of our DC under collection, and that would all be met by the ratepayer. So again, I just urge my colleagues to keep it simple and not set this very, I think, dangerous precedent.
Councillor Hughes.
I'm just wondering if this then could be put differently so that they could decide what they did with the funds rather than it get into murky areas of DCs at this point before we've made some kind of cohesive decision or not. It's a grant.
Yeah, it is just a grant. And look, we do have grant funds, and I guess it's always a good practice to encourage organisations to go through grant funding applications, but in this situation, they've come directly through the annual plan process seeking a grant, and so council can consider that. I guess the other alternate would be putting a greater sum of money into the grant fund so that everybody has a fair crack at it, but ultimately council can decide just to identify this one particular one-off grant. It does set a precedent, but that's fine.
Does that new information change anything? No. All right. Well, thank you, Councillor Clout, with your right of reply. Councillor, I'll put to you option 4, unstated as it is here. All those in favour, please say aye. Opposed? To see a raise of hands, thanks. Abstentions? Bill, what are you doing? Sorry, I was putting to you option 4 as was. Right, should we start again? Yeah. So all those in favour, please say aye. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All those opposed? So the motion is lost. Yes, yes.
I'm happy to move option 1.
And yeah, you are happy to move option 1, Councillor Arbery. Thank you. By Councillor Morris, seconded. Do you wish to speak to it?
This is one of our small community social housing providers that can do something tangible while central government gets scaled up, and we do have a housing emergency, so like I said before, I see this as being similar to the 40,000 we just gave to Athena House.
Thank you, Councillor Morris.
No, and I endorse Councillor Arbery's comments to the previous discussion around if it was Kāinga Order, that would be a much different discussion because it's a government entity and a taxpayer-funded entity. In terms of setting a dangerous precedent with a massive financial hole in our development contributions, I do believe that is an overstatement. But that being said, I know where he can find something to fill that hole with. Thank you.
Behind the bike sheds, no doubt.
Can I just...
Is there anyone else who would...
Can
Sorry,
I
Christine,
just
thank
suggest, sorry for interrupting, can I suggest to the mover and the seconder, just given the point that Jeremy raised, that we're not sure exactly what the application, what the DC charge is, if you change the resolution up to provide a grant of 50% of development contributions up to 40,000 payable by, so just so that it's linked to the, aligns to the budget.
Yeah, happy to adopt that.
Seconder, Councillor Morris, you happy to... Yes, thank you very much. Councillors Robson, followed by Clout, followed by Baldock, and I think Councillor Hughes? No, just the three, thank you.
Yeah, speaking to the motion, I agree with Councillor Morris's assessment that we don't have that many small community housing trusts that they are likely to destroy our DC structure. That's a significant overclaim. I do think this is another area where local groups and council are being forced to step in where central government have failed to. There's a theme of this across the country. You know, we know from work done by Cresser and K. Saville Smith that central government got out of providing social housing in the mid-80s, and it's not hard to draw a line between that abdication of their social responsibility and many of the issues we face today, right down to our prison population. We need to do something in this space. We're not actually picking up the cost of what it is they propose to do. We're not even giving them all the DCs back. It's not a large sum in the great scheme of things, and I can only reiterate Councillor Morris's advice to Councillor Clout that it's not hard to look through this budget and to find places where we are putting concrete ahead of people, and perhaps he needs to think about that as we go through the next day and a half.
I think it was Councillor Baldock, then Clout, I think. Clout.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll take that advice for what it is, Councillor Robson. I'm going to vote against this, and what I would like to do when it comes to our long-term plan is to look at setting up a contestable fund, a bulk fund, because when you think about what we've been talking about today, Athena House, Kāinga Tupu, this particular topic we're talking about at the moment, we're coming up to the Tauranga Community Food Bank as well. And on these very sort of specific decisions, one by one, I just think it becomes very messy, and I'd rather have a bulk fund that all these various organisations, and they're all very, you know, they fill a very important need in our society, could actually then apply to. So that's something I'll be looking for in the long-term plan. But I'll be voting against this particular one.
Thank you. Yes.
Look, I think this is another example where this caring for communities process provides an opportunity, and I think we set ourselves up through the CIP process to look at all of the infrastructure opportunities out there, and I think we need to do a similar process to look at all the social support opportunities and funding opportunities for central government as well. And so I think what we'll do is, yeah, we will scroll through the annual plan and LTP to see what projects or initiatives or services that actually fit nicely into the funding streams, and something like this, I would imagine, would fit into that type of application as well. So,
Thank you, Chief Executive. That's great. Councillor Baldock, thank you.
Thank you. Look, I just love all the generosity that's coming from the other side of the room. It's just encouraging. There's been a bit of talk about a black hole. Look, if you look at page 59, just above the Tauranga Community Housing Trust submission is Accessible Properties New Zealand Limited, which own more than 1,100 houses that they are going to be redeveloping in social housing. And I'm sure they'll see this grant today as an opportunity for them to approach us. Tauranga Community Housing Trust do a great job, but they do work in partnership with Kāinga Ora. The wonderful project over at Opal Drive was, funded by Kāinga Ora, or the Housing New Zealand then when they started it. So I think we're missing the point that the government would be covering lots of their cost if it is in social housing. They are able to get the market rental subsidy and so on. However, not wanting to be what was the one you said? A Scrooge, was it? Yes, I will support the proposal because we do need to. This is a grant one-off, but I'm very concerned we're starting to go down a slippery slope here that we'll have to address. But the relationship with central government is at the level now whereby we may see, if we put some money in, they see that we are serious. This is always the issue. And then, therefore, will come alongside and help us get better outcomes.
Thank you very much. I'm not sure who was next. Was there anyone? All right. Thanks, folks. So this is option one. Putting to you. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? No. Sorry, two against? Councillor Baldock? Oh, you are just one. One against, say, Councillor Clout. And carried. Thank you. And I beg your pardon. And Councillor Granger. Are there any abstentions? Carried. Thank you very much. We're on to number 4, which is the Tauranga Community Food Bank. If you're looking at your green sheets, I encourage you to flip over and you'll see that option 3, as you're reading it there, was that in the draft plan, with along with the $10,000 of Stewart and Carruthers Trust grant. Councillor Morris.
Thank you. Through you, Mr Mayor, a question. Is there an amalgam between option 1 and 2 in which the Stewart and Carruthers trusts fund that $30,000 or not?
I'd need to check, but I don't think so. You would need to go back and check the terms of the trust and things like that. And I think that one only gets allocated every 4 years. Yes, I'd need to check, but probably no.
Regardless of the time frame, it's a different decision-making process. You need to make decisions in terms of the trust deed rather than just making resource allocation decisions for the council.
Yes.
If I may, just on that, the two funds, Stewart and Carruthers, given the low interest rates at the moment, probably not accumulating much in there, are we? Is that the case? Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Morris. Do I have a seconder for option 1? Councillor Kitty. Thank you very much. Councillor Morris.
Yeah, very briefly, the Tauranga Community Food Bank, of course, relying on generous donations of businesses like the Port of Tauranga. Council made a decision to demolish their building on Dive Crescent, and there were reasons for that, but then that led to some events in which they then had to lease accommodation at that figure. And so this is really putting right the consequences of that decision to demolish the building there. Now, there were some concerns around the structural integrity of that building, significant concerns, although that was in a different era, if I can put it that way.
And I'd just like to say that I think, again, supporting something like the Tauranga Community Food Bank, who have been around for many years, is something really essential for us and for our community. I also really enjoyed their submission and the way that they positioned it, and they certainly weren't begging or asking for anything, they just gave us the facts, and I really appreciated that.
Thank you very much, Councillor Kitty. Councillor Hughes, followed by Councillor Arbery.
Yes, I'm also in full support of this. We're coming out of COVID-19. The least we can do is make sure that one of our primary sources of emergency food is available to as many people as we can, so I'm in full support.
Very much, Councillor Arbery.
Yeah, I'm in full support and have touched base through Jodie with Tony Community Food Bank to organise a visit for any elected members, so that can be coming up in the next couple of weeks. Speaking to it very quickly, they feed a significant proportion of our community. They're our biggest food provider in Tauranga. And going back to an earlier topic, Kāinga Tupu is actually going to be applying for funds from the government on behalf of the various food groups, as I understood it, which is another way that adds value, but that's a little bit off topic. So I'll be voting in favour.
Very good. Thank you very much. Anyone else? Councillor Robson.
Bit of a refrain, but I've actually visited their site, had the privilege of walking around and seeing the people doing the work there. It is partly a result of, as someone observed, in a different time, decisions made by council for various reasons. I do feel an obligation in this space, and I do observe that central government funding for various households in this city, directly and indirectly, is in the not too distant future likely to start winding down. And I believe at that point the demand for the social services in the city will start to wind up. However we do it, behind, in front, whispering, shouting, charming, bribing, central government need to be brought on board in this space. The list of projects that we're going to start applying for in this space is starting to become embarrassing for our central government. I look forward to seeing the staff list, and I'm already happy to move the motion that submits that list to central government for their acknowledgement and, better still, funding and addressing of. Happy to support the motion.
Very good, thank you. Well, assuming Minister Twyford is listening to this, I'm sure he is, he will be thrilled at the amount of discussion on bike sheds, because clearly that involves a multimodal transport option, and I'm sure he'll be thrilled at that. Councillor Bulldog.
That's very good, Mayor, that's very good. Look, I too will support it. And like Councillor Robson, I have also visited the Community Food Bank after I suffered the financial hardship of a massive pay cut. No, it wasn't to collect a food parcel. I was delivering feijoas there, and look, it would be fabulous to see if they could have a permanent place. This is a charity that will not be going away. It's not one that's sort of risen for a mead and then gone. And so to be in their own place in really good space, they are very cramped down there. That they can expand. They just provide a fantastic service to the community. And I will just conclude by saying all of that was a joke at the beginning of my speech, of course.
Very good. Thank you very much, Councillor Bulldog. Testing our sense of humour to the max. Option 1, folks, is what we're voting on. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Abstentions? And carried. It's 2:50. If we could just box on for another, say, 10 or 20 minutes. Do we have a quick break before we... we are now on to the Incubator Creative Hub. Attachment 4 of your pages, of your documents, pages 69 to 72. Option 3 is the same as the draft AP, which is to not provide additional funding. Thank you. Mr. Cloud.
I'd like to move option 1. Oh, if I've got a seconder. Thank you, Councillor Hollis.
Thank you.
Yep.
Please, if you'd like to speak to that now.
I mean, look, I think we all understand and realise that the incubator provides a massive boost to our social and cultural fabric within Tauranga City, and they do it often on the smell of an oily rag. They're very, very creative in the way that they utilise their funds. The three specific projects they're looking at here, Okarori, the Village Cinema and the Ceramic Precinct, I think will add a great deal to our city. I was surprised to learn that there was no, I guess to make community space for pottery and ceramics. I think there might be something in Bethlehem though, but in terms of something that's very much open to the wider creative community, I think this will be a real boost to them. And so I think we need to show our support to the arts and cultural sector within our city through this project, through this proposal.
Thank you, Councillor Clout. It was seconded by Councillor Hollis.
As surprising as that might be. I spent some time walking around the historic village and seeing some of the artisans that are there. It seems like the perfect place to collect that sort of activity in the arts. It would also possibly be a great place for our place to migrate to for historic purposes, but that's another story. I just agree that we are underwhelming in our support of the arts. We throw a lot of money towards sports, not necessarily TCC, but our community in general, and the arts are often left behind, so I'm in support of option 1.
Thank you very much. Councillors Hughes, followed by Arbery, followed by Morris.
Yes, I'd like to echo those comments. Also, really keen to support, especially grassroots community arts and historic village, just having that continuous vibrancy around it through these kind of projects, rather than so much at this time looking at events, but looking at things that can be ongoing. Also recognising that through that investment they will also be asking for funding from a whole lot of different angles, so our money then multiplies, really, is leveraged off a whole lot of different areas. They also incubator, along with all of these community groups, run off the smell of an oily rag, as we say, and they make money go a long, long way. So well keen to support.
Very much. Councillor Arbery.
Well, I'll be the Scrooge on this one. I'd be keen to move option 2 if this one doesn't go ahead. There's the 75,000 towards the incubator, but I think that also triggers building upgrades. That's additional costs. I think someone's got a microphone on, maybe. Additional costs to TCC, and for the kiln they also need additional power and electrical upgrades. So the total cost to Tauranga City Council will be, I can't remember the exact numbers, but it was, or maybe, do you have them handy, Gareth?
Off the top of my head, I wanted to say it was another 80k capex cost to accommodate the kiln.
Yeah, so to me it makes sense just to go ahead with Okarore, because that's provides good cultural boost to the village, but the other two, just wait until we finish the strategic review, which I believe is finishing up in November, and just delay the decision on those two for another 3 months.
Very much. Councillor Morris.
Yeah, I concur with the previous speaker, having just made some room for grant to Tauranga Community Housing Trust and the food bank. I think this is a trade-offs issue, and for me this is what needs to be traded off if we've made room for that. And I say that as someone who has had an interest in ceramics since 1990, when I was 9 years old, and I watched Demi Moore and Patrick Swayze and Ghost.
Thank you very much, Councillor Morris. Councillor Robson.
Yeah, this is one of these situations where Councillor Arbery is right to point out that the numbers on the page don't reflect the real cost to TCC. It's really important that the information we get in front of us does reflect all the costs. Councillor Larry Baldock's busy looking through standing orders at the moment to see whether I've crossed some line, but it is really, really important. That being said, both the projects outside option 2 I think are really, really important projects, and I do support the idea that there is an enormous multiplier in putting stuff in at grassroots. That 1,000 flowers blow philosophy, the grow philosophy. Don't know where I was there, smoking weed. Sorry. Let's start again. That 1,000 flowers grow philosophy has more evidence to support it than the trickle-down philosophy. And the multiplier in that sort of grassroots investment is significantly better than a lot of the times giving it to large, top-heavy organisations run by people whose interests don't necessarily align with the community, according to Adam Smith. But at the moment, in the situation we are, I can't support the proposal. But if there was another option, if the proposal falls and we go with option 2, I would like to see an amendment to that where the other 2 are put in place for the long-term plan, because I think that's where they need to be.
I think it was Councillor Baldock, followed by Councillor Granger.
Okay. Look, I'm similar to the others. I will support option 2, just so we don't have to make another speech. I think when you look at the report, there are still advantages for the incubator there with that smaller contribution now, and I'm sure, I hope we don't need to do an amendment, Councillor Robson, because it will come back to the LTP. I mean, they'll be back, and it'll be a different time, and I think we'll be able to address those. I'd like to see all 3 projects go ahead. They do a fantastic job, and but I think it'll be option 2 that I'd support if this fails.
Thank you, Councillor Granger.
Yeah, thank you. Look, the incubator's been around for a long time, a very, very long time, and the thing is, they've done some amazing things down there for the community at the village. The community have certainly enjoyed those things that they have been involved with, and yes, they have, for a long, long time, managed on an orderly rag. These people deserve, it's not a lot, but they deserve, certainly. But the choice, I'd probably give them more. But they certainly deserve something. And as regards to the $75,000 go toward the operational costs, I certainly will support that.
Thank you. I think it's just important to re-clarify, as I understand it, Gareth, from what you said, it's 75 plus 80, which is for the kiln. Is that correct?
We haven't done exact work on what it's going to cost because this just came up, relatively recently. But the high-level estimate is that we've got to lay a concrete pad to sustain the weight and do some other work, and the estimate was somewhere around $80,000 worth of capex to be able to install the kiln. That would be paid for as part of the money they're asking for.
Be fair to say it's more like 155 than it is 75?
Yes, but some OPEX, some capex.
Can I just, has everybody else finished? Councillor? No. Look, I find myself in enthusiastic agreement on 2 things with Councillor Morris. One is on Demi Moore, with or without the wet clay. I think she's fabulous. But I think we are looking at trade-offs here, but I also absolutely agree with Councillor Hollis that the arts are very important, very, very important to us, and they do a stunning job down here, as Councillor Granger said. Like many of the others, and without wanting to labour this, I would be a fan of option 2 because I'm just a bit worried that option 1, while, because of the new information that Gareth's given us, we might find ourselves buying into an awful lot more than the 75. In fact, it may actually be more than 155. So if this fails, I would be keen to support option 2, like many others. Councillor Cloud, thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out, I think Councillor Robson said that, the extent of the expenditure was not down here in black and white, but I'll just point him to the very bottom of page 70, which does recognise that option 1 does have a capex implication of between $80,000 and $100,000, so that is there in black and white. Thanks.
Indeed, thanks for pointing that out. Well, look, I will put to you we have on the table at the moment for the incubator option 1. All those in favour, please say aye. If I could see a show of hands, high, please, if we can. So 1, Cloud, 2, 3, 4. All those against? The motion is not carried. Happy to move option 2. Thank you very much. and Councillor Hollis to second. Do you wish to speak to it, or shall we? Very good. Councillor Hollis?
No, I just feel half as pleased.
Very good.
Yeah, good point. A third is pleased.
33% pleased. Very good. Anyone else? Just come up with the motion to you. All those in favour of option 2, please say aye. Against? Abstentions? And carried. Thank you very much. 302, do you want to have a break now, or do you want to keep boxing through to, if we can do, to the Bay Oval, and leaving that before the break? Break now? Well, let's break until 15:15 then, and with a view to boxing through till 5:30. Is that okay? Thank you. Yep, I think we're all here. I've just had a request from the executive. If we could adjourn the current item and move to your back page 10.5, the reason being the staff who want to talk to this will not be available tomorrow and need to leave soon. So with your excuse me, agreement, that would be great. Christine, would you like to speak to this, just to open it up? Thank you. So this is 10.5, pages 174 to 188 on your doc.
So all the submissions that relate to development contributions, we pull those out separately, and we work with the developers on those. Anna and Anna, who the two staff are here to answer any specific questions. Generally, they are in relation to some of the detail that sits in the structure plans, specific projects, and for developer reimbursements. And you'll see a number of the staff are agreeing with, and some others we've got a different view. Staff are probably the best if you've got any specific questions on any projects. And then you'll also note Resolution B, if you make any adjustments to any projects that are DC funded through any of your other deliberations, the DC policy impacts of those, we pick them up and flow them through. And so that resolution just means that we then capture that flow-on impact of any other decisions that you might make for growth-related projects.
And thank you, Christine. Are there any other staff members that we're going to? No? Okay. All right, just a question. So, just bear with me 2 seconds. 10.5 Council, we've got A and B. As you can read them, approves the responses to the external submissions and notes that were applicable to the development contributions policy. Are there any questions on that? Councillor Robson.
Through you to staff, Your Worship, it's a fraught area, DCs, and trying to get one's head around it. It's highly complex. The questions asked by developers are technical. I do notice a theme, though. In terms of the individual responses, having read those, is there anything you would pull out as a thematic heads up for governments around DCs? Is there anything thematic there that you saw in the submissions that we should be aware of? Other than, of course, developers don't like paying DCs, which we know.
From my recollection, but I'll ask Anna and Anna to, if they've got any comments that they want to make.
Thanks very much, ladies.
I guess this year we did see more submissions from kind of different types of developments asking for consideration. So, for example, supermarkets, retirement villages, saying that their demand typology kind of essentially means, yes, you're right, that they shouldn't have to pay DCs, or that we should be looking at, but rather than it being, we don't want to pay DCs, it's actually talking about specifically the demand traits of our developments. And so I guess we are looking at this upcoming year at doing a lot of review, and so that's where we've kind of recovered that, is we need to look at the demand of those different characteristics. Auckland Council has done a large review of things like retirement villages, and they've worked really closely, so we'll be looking at some of the demand from them. So at the moment, it wouldn't be appropriate to make any changes in
And
response
just
to those.
for clarification, just so I'm supplementary to Councillor Robson's question, they're looking for a lesser percentage because they're retirement villages and they're treated differently because of their status, is that correct?
They're basically saying that they generate a lower demand on infrastructure for XYZ reason. Retirement villages, they're talking about that, for example, that a lot of the residents don't use community infrastructure. Supermarkets was different again, that they had some other reasoning. Schools, again. But all the kind of same trend, I guess is what I'm saying. Same kind of theme is that they are asking that we consider adding special categories into the development contributions policy that would essentially reduce the amount that they would pay. But we can't do that without specifically looking at the demand that those types of developments do place.
If I may, it's something that I'm starting to see, that fragmentation. I'm also conscious of our nearest neighbour having a far more complex, they would say sophisticated rating structure than us. So if I can broaden it a little bit through you to staff, possibly Chief Executive or Christine, and I'm conscious of a debate coming up later around the UAGC differential discussion. Is there any thought given in this discussion about nuancing the sort of DC categorization, whether we should be looking at nuancing our rating classifications? Because we are pretty black and white, pretty simple structure. A number of councils have a far greater range of structures to sort of address these issues. So I'm not saying obviously for this AP, but is that a conversation happening anywhere?
My answer was going to be not through this annual plan process,
No.
but it is a conversation that we can have leading into the LTP. We'll have that early, obviously, because if it means a comprehensive review of our rating structure, we'll need to know very early. But we'll be reporting back shortly on that.
Through the chair, yes. I can't remember the exact timing, but as the chief executive says, it's one of the early workshops to go through what we will look at in terms of rating structures.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Excuse me, other questions, councillors? And Councillor Robson, your mic is on.
Thank
you. Sorry, Larry, you happy to move? Thank you very much. Can I get a second, please? Councillor Robson, thank you. Do you wish to speak? No, and Councillor Robson? Do you wish to speak to it? Anyone else? Can I put this to you then, both A and B? All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. And opposed, against, abstentions, and carried. Thank you very much. Thanks, Anna and Anna. That's very good of you. Thank you. Which takes us back then to Taonga. Yep, just trying to find it. That's exactly right, though. Oh, on the wrong sheet. That's half the problem. Right, here we go. Yeah, exactly. Page 6 of your greens, if you're using those. Taonga, number 6.
Questions are finished.
You're happy to move option 1. I just draw your attention before that excuse me, option 2 was the same as the draft AP.
And with a possible caveat, oh, you got a question?
Lollies. Question.
Sorry,
Yeah, question.
Councillor Morris, thank you.
Noting the two submissions there, 816 and 832, just for my clarity, is this relating to, in any way, the submission that described the Waipa District Council's virtual heritage tour, or not?
If that was Bruce Farthing, then yes. There's funding towards a process which may end up with something like that.
Yeah, just for clarity, it was Bruce Farthing used that as an example in his submission. Yeah.
And if I'm moving it, it would be with the discussion we had earlier about that 70,000 that, you know, was in the museum tranche, that we might be using 20 of that for this funding, if necessary, from my colleagues. If not, we just go for it now and then look at where we take it from later, eh? When we start addressing the figure on the wall, if members would be happy with that. So I'll just move option 1.
I'll second that.
Thank you.
Clarification, please, before we go. Clarification.
Sure.
I believe the total we're looking at now is 40,000 rather than 45, which option 1 is showing 20,000 plus increasing by 25. So, I mean, what I'm saying is it says there in brackets, increased budget by 25.
Okay, that's Jeremy's mistake.
So it's
You found it,
20,000?
well done.
Okay,
Yep,
thank
I
you.
missed that one. Sorry.
So, Jeremy, just be clear, that increased budget by 25 should not be there?
No, it just should be
Okay, thank
increased
you.
budget by
Just
20,000.
delete that, Council, please.
Thick fingers.
Thank you very much. Councillor Board, Councillor, who's seconder? Councillors Baldock and Deputy Mayor Salisbury, is that not correct?
No, Heidi.
It's Councillor Baldock and Councillor Hughes. Thank you very much. Councillor Baldock, thank you.
I think we had good submissions on this, and I can't see the support page there, but this is a very reasonable amount to keep us moving forward. I think they've come up with a great concept of developing the strategy. We've already contributed 10,000 to it, and that has been delivered satisfactorily with the work they've done so far. And this will just keep it moving. It's the way to unify the Western Bay in an agreed sort of strategy before we get to major funding issues at any point in the future. So I hope we can support this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Hughes.
Yeah, I'll just endorse those comments. It's a small amount of money for a really good strategy and outcome. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Robson.
I'm this is a bit like for me the work on homelessness. It's how we frame things I think is really important. The homelessness thing got me over the line because it recognised the housing issue as front and centre. What this discussion, certainly the submission, how it moved me was it wasn't about building a large building. It was about recognising that our history is all around us and that we just need to surface it and provide people a way of connecting to it, journeying through it, experiencing it. And when I think about the potential spin-offs in terms of from an ED perspective, this could be easily framed as an economic development initiative. And that goes back to the points I raised earlier, which I know we're going to come to hopefully later, about how we see the whole ED space. But more than happy to support this proposal, more than happy.
Thank you. Councillor Kitty.
And again, I would like to also endorse what everyone has said so far. I was absolutely blown away with their submission. It was very clear. I think we all got excited, of course, about all submissions, but this one I got really excited about, and I've developed a whole plan myself just from this. So I really can't wait to talk to everyone there and get all our community involved. I think not only is this a community will come along with us with this, a heritage trail is well needed, and I think it could produce some exactly economic development, tourism. I think there's so many offshoots onto here that could help. I'm really, really supportive of this one. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Council. Well, I'll put this to you then. We have option 1 on the table. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? And carried. Thank you. Moving to number 7, the Water Safety Bay of Plenty. Option in the AP is number 2, which is to reconfirm the $25,000 already allocated. Thank you very much. I'm happy to second that. Well, Councillor, I think it was actually Councillor Hollis was in just a bit beforehand. Thank you. Councillor Morris.
Yeah, don't wish to speak to it. I think it's makes sense.
Thank you, Councillor Hollis. Thank you. Anyone else? I'll put this to you. All of those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Abstentions? Carried. Thank you very much. Amanawa Falls, number 8. The, excuse me, the status quo is that which is currently in the draft AP. Option 3.
Questions? Can we ask?
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, thank you. So just to staff, just very concerned about the increase in the estimated cost of the whole project, and I admit that prices have obviously gone up in the last 3 years, but there's significant increase in that. So is there a bit more sort of elaboration on why the explosion in the cost?
There's quite a wide variety of reasons. First of which, that was originally budgeted some 3+ years ago. It was originally budgeted on a scope that I think you could probably say was plucked out of thin air. And in the time that has proceeded, and in particular the last few months and the close conversations with Ngāti Hangaro, we've started to really fine-tune what might actually be able to be delivered there. So, it's pretty easy to see where we've got to.
Thanks, Gareth. Councillor Bullock, followed by Councillor.
Just two questions, if I can. One, where are we with the funding that was achieved through the Tourism Fund regarding the car park? Is that still live, or have we lost that already? And secondly, what realistically is likely to need funding in this coming year, given that this is a partnership with Ngāti Hangarau and there's a lot of discussion to be done? Those are big figures in there, 2 million here and there. To keep things moving, what would be a realistic figure?
I can answer the first one, and then I might get Mark and Warren up. So yes, the funding from government is still live. It was in jeopardy. We went back in the last month with an updated proposal, which is where we've managed to get some updated costs from, and you guys I think have got an attachment that shows some pretty pictures. So that money is live, but again, like the last time, it'll have a limited lifespan. So we do actually need to get cracking and do something. In regards to what we are actually realistically planning to be able to do in this current financial year.
And the time frame, if anyone knows what that might be with losing that up.
Good afternoon. What we're trying to achieve this year is complex and in an artificially compressed time frame due to the MB funding. What's the date on the funding? Is it this Christmas or next?
Mark, can you turn your mic on your right-hand side, to your right-hand side? Thanks.
So what we're looking at is completion by December 21.
So what we're looking at this year is a number of things. So because we know we've got a compressed time frame, we're looking at tendering concurrently for all of the planning aspects, such as geotechnical engineering, civil engineering for the rock face stroke tunnel investigations, civil engineering for the car park draining and building services, structural engineering, landscape design, architectural design, traffic impact assessment, and other minors consultants such as electrical services, planning, ecologists, cultural monitoring, etc. Getting that all lined up. So once we get an agreed plan with Ngāti Hangarau, we are then ready to look at various options and then focus the design aspects on one option and then take that to construction. It is rather aspirational, but we are also optimistic.
Thank you. I'm happy to move option 2 from the chair. If I can get a seconder. Sure.
So does that, all those things you're going to design now and then get agreement from Ngāti Hangarau, does that include all those red ones on this thing?
We're not intending to design it and then get agreement. It's a co-design project. We have a project governance group, which, as Councillor Robson pointed out earlier, includes 2 EMs, a number of senior staff, and Hangarau are represented at every stage. So the co-design should be agreed all the way through to make sure we have every aspect that they feel is important, and we can represent that in the design process.
As I said, I'm happy to move option 2 from the chair, and I do so because I would like to think that we could look really hard at alternative sources of funding rather than just continually going back to our ratepayers. And I would have thought that this, which is I've lost the word, but it's a significant project for the area from a tourism point of view, from a cultural point of view. It spans many of the 4 wellbeings in many respects. I think we'll get. I think we'll do really well as a fundraise, if you will, a co-investment partnership. With all due respect, option 1 talks about a council funded. Thank you, Tina. I beg your pardon, I missed that. So look, I just think that, as I said, I'm not going to repeat it. I think there's real options to fund this externally to just looking at rates.
Just for clarification, would option 2, if we're looking at other sources of funding, does it preclude council being a part of that funding solution?
No, but we would have to come back for any additional money over and above what's already in the budget.
Councillors Granger, followed by Councillor Hughes.
Yeah, just one question before I do make a comment, and just in regards to that option 2 then, where it says here 2.146 million, but not funded by council. So in other words, it doesn't give us the opportunity to, if we wish to do so, to put so much capital towards it.
As Gareth said, I think there's an opportunity for us to be a co-investment partner in it if we...
Option 2 means the funding already committed to the project is a given, and anything over and above that to go towards the delivery of the full scope of the project, as per option 2, would come from an external funder. If you wanted to put additional council funds into it, we'd need to come back for another conversation.
Just
So
a matter
in
of
that
process
case-
through you, Mr. Chair. I think if, and this one in particular, if we're working off my green cheat sheet, it's probably a fraction light on the detail. We probably need to be at page 80 of the agenda because it's a lot clearer what the options cover in the agenda.
Thank you, Jeremy.
So Gareth, you able to explain the full costs of the project, the funds that we currently have committed, those that the Crown have committed, and the 2.16 is additional to both of those, is correct?
Yeah, I'll give it a go. So my understanding is that there is the total cost of the fully scoped option that we have at the moment is 3.8 million, of which we've put aside the 0.8, and there's $1 million, I'm just rounding up here, $1 million from TIF, which means we're short 2 million. So it's actually 2.14. So that's that option. I guess the full delivery scope option is exactly the same for option 2. All we're saying is that instead of asking council for 2.14 to make up the difference, we're going to go and see if we can find it somewhere else. No promises.
Exactly. Councillor Granger.
Just wanted to continue then. In that case, my comment is simply this: absolutely support that option. And if we do get the possibility, and then there is all of that could happen, I could say with confidence, let's do it. I just feel that we'll go down the right direction, right step if we do.
Good, thank you. Councillor Robson, followed by my colleague Councillor Morris, where we're trying to keep the rates down.
Yeah. As I alluded to at the top of this meeting, to me, this is a good project, an important project, a project that speaks to many of the relationships that many of us hold important, including Western Bay, iwi, tourism, economic development. I would rather see this proceed with certainty than hold the Vic in our budget. And to me, that's a trade-off I'm more than prepared to make. And I think certainty is important. The reason I vote against this is because it just creates a level of uncertainty, and I can foresee a situation, as we've been in before, and many times, where the hoped-for funding doesn't come, and we wind up under pressure. Whereas if we went with option 1, this does not preclude us seeking substitute funding from other sources, but it does give the project certainty. The message we're sending to our partners by going with option 2 is quite simply, we're committed, but not so much that we want to make sure it happens. We're prepared to roll the dice on other people's commitment. It creates a level of uncertainty that will result, I fear, in another set of broken promises to people who, one of their biggest complaints is the promises that have been made to them in the past have not been kept. And in this, I'm 100% consistent that when you make promises to people, you keep them. And don't make promises you can't keep or you're not prepared to fund.
Thank you. Councillor Baldock, followed by Councillor Arbery.
I guess that was a speech in opposition to the option 2, was it? I mean, I think some of the points are valid, but we have already and have 0.8 million in there, and we have managed to secure 1 million from the tourism fund. I just don't see this getting underway overnight. There's a lot of work to do. And safety is a serious concern out there. And anything you try and do to open up what people want to do at the site, it's going to cost a lot. If we get to a point, which has been explained by the staff, whereby we don't get external funding and we need to come back to council for a contribution, that's when your conversation about Vic is valid, because it's there in the LTP and can be, knocked off then if you need to and pulled across for this fund. So I don't think that has to be decided today. There is enough there to keep moving forward, but as much as possible we should be trying to find external partners for this, because I actually think the cost will probably go a lot further than this to do it properly, to make it safe, and the kind of project we would like it to be to attract people.
Thanks, Councillor Bullock. Councillor yep, loud and clear. Councillor Arbery, thank you, followed by Councillor Morris.
So I just want to point out that in option 1, part of that resolution is if we approve the full amount, Council requires staff to actively pursue external funding opportunities to mitigate the full impact of the additional funding on Council. So my view would be go with option 1, commit it, then we know the project is going ahead. There's no doubt, and the staff can engage contractors as needed. If we leave it hanging and we can't find that extra funding, the staff have to come back for another decision. And it sounds like we're all indicating that we would give that approval in any case, but it seems to create extra admin for me and creates uncertainty for a project that I don't think needs to be there, particularly with a compressed timeline if we're trying to deliver before the December of next year to get this tourism funding.
Thank you, Councillor Morris.
Thank you, and I do acknowledge the Mayor's comments earlier. They gave me some warm fuzzies. Thank you for that. I do support the intent in terms of gaining additional philanthropic funding. However, I think it's worth acknowledging the stress that the philanthropic sector is under presently in terms of diminished returns. And if we were to secure this level of funding for this project, that would be an historic first in terms of the level of philanthropic funding for a project in Tauranga, certainly more than the art gallery. So I don't think it's achievable. If option 2 passes, I would be the first to congratulate the Mayor and colleagues should we get the funding, but I just don't think the sector is able to provide the funding at the moment. And I think, we might get 100k from our partners at Western Bay and that'd be gratefully received. You might get a little bit from tech, but diminished returns, we need to provide certainty. I support Councillor Arbery's comments earlier.
Sure. Thanks very much, Councillor Morris. Anyone else? Councillor Hughes.
I'm just wondering, did we have any leads on funding for this, or is it just kind of cast it to the winds? Because I kind of agree that there's not a lot of money out there at the moment on any front. I can't imagine that how we could be, unless we've got some ideas already.
Other than the usual suspects, no leads, and all of our recent energy has gone into retaining the TIF funding through till December 21 when we have to use it by.
I actually think that caring for communities is another prime opportunity, which I guess really has only become obvious to us in the last week. So somehow I think there needs to be great attention on the organisation to seek external funds. Yeah, well, I don't, historically, I think we have relied on rates to fund all of our projects, and that certainly in other local authorities that I've worked for, certainly community projects that cover the four well-beings are generally co-funded, and there's obviously there are common co-funding arrangements out there, which is something that actually we don't do very well as an organisation. So.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Ask a question, if I may, just from the report, page 80, which I looked at before, just to clarify, under the budget, if we went with option 1, which is just so people have it in their minds, there's a budget there of OPEX. Is that all cumulative? 80,000, of which 40,000 budgeted. Additional debt, 37,600. Debt servicing, additional debt servicing cost, 75. Are they the figures that would go into that number on the board if we turned this down and went with option 1 right now in this annual plan?
No, none of it next year, because we wouldn't have constructed, but there would be some in following years. And further to Marty's point, we've definitely identified this project as something that could attract support, in particular through the Jobs for Nature Fund, and linking with Ngāti Hangaro in terms of providing ongoing support of the opportunity.
What would the impact be if we turned this down and went to option 1 in this year? I know some people may have heard that you're all going to do a Mexican wave if we hit 6%, and they may be wanting to see that happen. How much? What is the impact of this, please, in this annual plan?
I think we'll have to put it on the board and just do some work.
Look, the difference between option 1 and option 2 is really just nuance. It's still the same project. It's still the same budget. It's just the funding source. So, I guess.
If I can add it would obviously, it'd be an impact on that ratio. There'd be a high debt figure in option 1 to option 2 that we would reflect in there. The rate number would be impacted the following year. Debt servicing, depreciation, yeah.
Perhaps a bit of background too, because this project has evolved quickly and more recently in terms of the shift, and that was as a result primarily of the work that we've been doing with Ngāti Hangaro, and also the requirement to resubmit essentially the proposal to central government to secure their funding commitment to this. And so the number, I think, surprised us all, and to be frank, there hadn't been a lot of thought as to how we actually would fund it. So typically we just revert to the rates.
By way of right of reply, does anybody else want to speak to this? I just think there's an opportunity. This is a very, very special project. It's a very special part of the Western Bay of Plenty, and it is the Western Bay of Plenty, and I think there's opportunities to go back to Western Bay Council and seek greater support. I think there would be, I appreciate it's tough times, but it's because of that I just don't think we should be impacting on the ratepayer all the time for all these projects. And I think that if ever there's a time to get motivated to try and fundraise with co-investment partners around something which is a very special tourist opportunity, it is today. And look, if it doesn't work, and you'll have my commitment that I'll go very hard to try and raise some money and work with people, including central government, but if it doesn't work, we can revert back. We've lost nothing, but we've got an opportunity to not have that 5.2 go up, because I'd like to see it come back to 4.7. I will put to you, as we're discussing it now, option 2 of the Omanawa Falls discussion. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Can I see your hands up, please? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Against? Any abstentions? And carried. Thank you very much. Which takes us on to number 9, which is the Mount Maunganui Cricket Club facility at Blake Park. The option that's the same as the AP, draft AP, is option 3.
I'm
Councillor Cloud.
happy to move option 2. Where we provide a lease and a loan funded grant of 30% of the total project cost.
If there's no seconder, I move option 1.
Mine to second it, I just would like to get the page in front of me, 84, if I can.
Sorry, I should have read that out. It's pages 84 to 86, yeah. Everybody's gathering their wits. Paul, just in terms of the loan, you've got here the increase in OPEX and debt. As a rule, and there may not be a rule, but are there terms associated with those loans, or loans of this sort?
It's how we would treat it. So it's a grant, but our funding would be via debt rather than the normal OPEX funded, rate funded.
I will second Councillor Clout's motion.
Thank you. And speaking to this, this issue has a very long-standing history, and we won't go through all of it. But this is the 4th time that the Mount Maunganui Cricket Club has come and submitted to us on this. Basically, it's a temporary, but I think it'll last quite a few years, home for their cricket club. It's the largest cricket club membership in Tauranga, and the spot that we're looking at is just next to the netball courts, and I think it's perfectly positioned between the two ovals on the upper tier of Blake Park, and it's a spot that really at the moment is dead and not really utilised. So I think it's a really good place to position it. The bulk of our contribution is going to come from a reallocation of the irrigation works and the new cricket wicket of some $80,000. And the other thing to remember, this particular clubhouse will be available to other users of the park, particularly during winter. And I understand that particularly the junior rugby are looking forward to accessing that building as well during the winter months. Thank you.
Councillor Clout. Councillor Bullock, you've seconded this. Thank you. You're reserved. Thank you. Councillor Robson.
I'm happy to support this. Put on record that I don't understand cricket in the sense that why someone would spend so much time looking at two blokes. But I know the history of this place. I've been part of the working group that's worked with this club. It makes sense to me to address this issue and put it to bed. The cricket club have been extraordinarily patient to the point where, like in numbers, their frustration has shown occasionally. And I think this is a case where we can sort of put something right and move forward. It will provide some minor benefit to other codes potentially in the off-season, but increasingly, of course, with sports, the shoulders do start to expand. There is an underlying issue with Blake Park. There's an underlying issue with the city's aspirations to be a world-class centre of premier sport and also provide community facilities. And to a certain extent, Blake Park is being squeezed. The community is being squeezed significantly from it, and we need to address that at some point, but the patience and the original setup, the need to put this to bed and to move on, I'm happy to support the option proposed.
Thank you very much. Well, councillors, I'll put that to you. We've got it. We are looking at option 2. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Can you hold your hands up high, please, councillors Arbery, Kitty and Granger. Any abstentions? One abstention, Councillor Hughes, and I'm for. So otherwise carried. Thank you very much. Which leads us on very suitably to the Bay Oval. Which you'll find pages 87 to 90. Paul, thank you.
I can talk probably more to the guarantee and maybe Gareth to the lease arrangement, but there's two parts to this. One is the lease arrangement for the indoor cricket facility. But the trust has $1.5 million of funding. They need another $2 million. The request was to be a guarantor for that loan. recommendation is that we wouldn't normally enter into a guarantee to this amount. It would sit on our balance sheet effectively in terms of its treatment from funders and rating agencies, and obviously there's a risk of that guarantee being exercised. So that's the recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Robson.
Who are the trustees of the Bay Oval Trust, please?
Don't know off the top of my head, but I'll find out.
Councillor Bulldog.
I'll move. There's no more questions.
Councillor Robson had another question.
Yeah, sorry, thank you. How much money have the ratepayers put into this facility, directly and indirectly, so far? That includes the ground, the lights.
Yeah, would have to confirm the lights being the bulk, but would have to
operational
confirm
costs.
the amount.
We'll come back to you.
Thank you. Councillor Hollis.
With this money that's being asked for, will it increase the odds of Bay Oval being utilised in more senior and international games?
Just to clarify, that the request isn't for funding, it's the request is for the guarantee in there.
I was talking from their perspective.
Yeah, and just to be clear, we don't recommend we do this. No, to underwrite.
Guarantee.
Yeah.
Okay, can I rephrase that? What I'm getting at is if the total quantum is 3.5 million that Bay Oval is looking for, regardless of who guarantees or doesn't guarantee, not getting 3.5 million, will that prevent any of the senior games being played and move them to other jurisdictions so that we lose out on the income as a city?
I think that's a question probably better directed to the Bay Oval Trust. I think they would say yes. I think there's an element of truth to that. I don't know that it's necessarily the full story. And just to be clear, we're proposing to support the provision of land through a lease for them to undertake the activity and build it. We're just not proposing to underwrite a $2 million loan to help debt fund the gap in funding. We also have a list of trustees, so Neil Craig, Craig Greenlees, Fraser Lellman, Stuart Brown, Bernadette Ryan Hopkins and Peter Williams.
Councillor Bulldog.
Happy to move A. Well, what is it? B, is it? Bay Oval attachment 9, you've got B. Where did the A go? I'm on the green sheet there, but certainly wish to support the provision of the land via lease arrangements for the facility is what I would move.
Okay, so what's here at the moment is, just to be very clear, is the declining of the Bay Oval Trust's request for a $2 million loan guarantee. Is that what you're...
No, there are, well, you've got in parts there.
Oh, I see what I'm doing in parts. Right,
You've
sorry,
got-
I beg your pardon.
So all I'm moving is works, I think I've got off the green sheet here, works with Bay Oval Trust to amend lease arrangement at the Bay Oval to allow for an indoor cricket training facility.
Right, so you're just moving that?
Yes.
Right. Any discussion on it? And thank you, Councillor Arbery.
Look, the intention is to try and make this, and they're making progress on it, to be the New Zealand home of cricket. Even the potential of them making that decision soon if they aren't yet. And we've seen the impact on our city when we've hosted international cricket matches. We've seen the fact that television goes out to more than 1 billion in the subcontinent that watch it. It's an incredible development. If our contribution right now for the expansion, and obviously, an indoor cricket facility does not mean we get more games, but it does mean it does have impact upon this becoming the home of New Zealand cricket. And we have some of the best cricketers living in this area right now, which is a good time to support it. So I can't see any downside in providing the land or amending the leases. And then if after other questions are answered, some of them that Councillor Robson has asked, come back to us, we can look at a loan guarantee if that was the only way forward. But at this stage, I don't see it's necessary. But we would like to give our support that the land is made available.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Bullock. Very interesting. Councillor Hughes, followed by Councillor Arbery.
Yeah, I also not in support of the loan, but in support of the lease arrangements. But I'd like to also just add that it's a designated polluted airshed in Mount Maunganui for the training and of elite athletes. So that's something we really need to look at as a council if we're going to be attracting world-class organisations and elite teams into our area. Then we need to take a serious look at the health implications of putting them on Blake Park, or agree to do something about that problem.
Thank you. Councillor Arbery, my apologies. You seconded this. My
That's okay.
apologies not recognising that.
So I think any time that someone else is willing to fund community infrastructure, like a new sports venue, I think we shouldn't get in the way of that, particularly if we've got a number of community groups that use our land across areas. I mean, there is difficulty or a disadvantage of having another council building on council land, but I think that's a minor cost compared to the social gain for the city. And I know we'll be taking it in the next part, but I don't think we should be guaranteeing other people's loans. We're not the bank or their parents.
Right, thank you. Councillor Hollis.
Arguably, the polluted airshed is good training for games in India and Pakistan.
Perfect. If that's the case, I'll put to you A, if we're doing this in parts. All those in favour of, which is in fact, as you're looking your green sheets, B, but you know what I mean. Thank you very much. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Abstentions? And carried. And in terms of the declination, abstention from Councillor Robson. In terms of the declination of C.
Happy to move.
Thank you very much. And a second, Deputy Mayor Salisbury, thank you. Do you wish to speak to that, or can we just... And all those in favour of declining the Bay of Falls Trust for the $2 million loan guarantee, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Abstentions? Carried. Thank you very much. Who is the mover of that last one, sorry? Yeah, okay. Yeah, and Tina. Colleagues, this moves us to economic development, which is D on your papers. Just making you aware that option 3D, well, option D13 is is that which appears in the draft AP. Thank you, Councillor Robson. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Robson at the moment is moving option 3, which is provide no new funding to the Venture Centre, which is the same as the draft AP. Thank you, Councillor Morris. A second. Councillor Robson, do you wish to speak to this?
Microphone. As I said earlier, we put a lot of money into sport. We don't put that much into the arts. We put quite a bit of money into ED under various headings. This idea of providing support in this space has been looked at before. My understanding is that there's an irony that there are small startups actually operating in the space of offering this expertise. That's part of their business model. So for us to pick one particular supplier out and subsidise them doesn't make sense to me. Let the market sort this one out to a point. I see no sense in putting marginal additional funding into ED in this way.
Thank you. Councillor Morris.
No, don't wish to speak. Thank you.
Councillor Cloud, thank you.
Yeah, I'll vote against this. The way I view Venture Centre, I see them a little bit like the incubator of the ED space, and they do really support grassroots economic development and startups particularly. So I'm certainly in favour of allocating them $40,000. So I'll be voting against this, and if it does fail, I'll be promoting that option. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hughes.
Can I just get clarification? It says here that they are a charity. Are they a charity or a business? They are a charity. Thank you. I'll be supporting this investment. I've been involved in some of the startups that they do. They really do bring a lot of young entrepreneurs together and throw around ideas, fresh thinking, innovative solutions. And I think that's something that we really need to support in this city to have a dynamic future for some of our young people. So that's my view on that.
Tremendous. Thank you very much. Councillor Baldock.
Yeah, I'll vote against the current option and support what might come if this is defeated. I think they do a lot. This is a pathway for many small entrepreneurial ideas into angel investor capital, which is very, very important for them. If we're investing money in people in homelessness and, you know, all of these issues which are very important, we've also got to provide jobs in the city, and these small venture capitals do grow, enterprises do grow, and I think it's a reasonable investment in that in our city. So I'll vote against the current resolution. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Arbery.
Yeah, this one's tricky because I do support the work that Venture Centre does, but when I compare it to the value, you know, that the food bank provides, to me this isn't as important. I see the council not necessarily as having to provide all the jobs in the city. That's to me more a market thing. But then again, Venture Centre is a charity, so I'm a little bit conflicted on this one. So I think I'll probably end up abstaining.
Thank you. Councillor Robson, do you wish to close at all?
No one else to speak?
I don't believe so.
I just pick up one thing. Charity is a status of an organisation, but a number of people who work for charities actually earn money. They have salaries. Some charities, I don't know the status of this one, I haven't been given the opportunity to peruse their financials. I would love that opportunity. But there is a increasing tendency, I find, in certain sectors to greenwash, charity wash things that people want to do, but that inside their financials. I don't know in this case, but for me, it's not our role to provide jobs. There are other people working in this sector. Interesting enough, there are startups, as I say, working in the sector, entrepreneurs trying to start their business in their sector. And I believe that sort of a charity operating in the sector is at best disingenuous and at worst something worse. I really want people to think about what they're trying to achieve here and whether we've got a better place to put $40,000.
Very good. Thank you, Councillor. I'll put this to you. We're looking at option 3, provide no new funding to the Venture Centre. All those in favour, please say aye. I see a show of hands. 1, 6, 7, and I'm 8. And against? 3. The motion is carried. Thank you very much. Which moves us on to BOP film, pages 93 and 4 of your report. Councillor Morris.
A question, if I may, through you, Mayor. What have the other funders of Film BOP decided? I know that we had a presentation from them in submissions and there were some other funders outstanding, so that would be quite useful in determining what we should grant. We don't know? Okay, thank you.
So can I just understand the question here in the Western Bay of Plenty or in the Bay of Plenty or generally, do you mean?
Yeah, Western Bay Plenty, but also regional council too.
Right, well, so to...
The big region.
So to my knowledge, and I stand to be corrected, Gareth, the Western Bay of Plenty provide a small amount. Rotorua provide a small amount again. We provide the most by some margin. And Whakatane provide a small amount. I don't believe Kauro Oporiki do at all too, if my memory serves me correctly.
I can't answer that question, sorry. It sits within strategy and growth in Ross Hudson's area.
The current funding arrangement is coming to an end as of 3 weeks ago, at the end of June. So they're now asking for a new funding arrangement. We've given you options for a sort of 1 year, 3 year type approach, or 0.
Yeah, I did receive something on this the other day which indicated that Kaurau and Aporiki were not going to continue funding, and that Whakatane, Rotorua were, and essentially I think it's a decision for us as whether we continue or not.
Supplementary, if I may, the regional council committed funding at the beginning, I think, of last LCP, a significant amount of funding. Do we know where they're at? I have a feeling that it's a no, but I don't want to operate on feeling.
Well, look, shall we just park this one, and we'll come back to you with where the other councils are in terms of their commitment to this?
Yes, please.
Right, if you're happy to do that.
And can we just confirm that we have been contributing 75k per year for the last 3 years? I think that's the right amount.
I think it's more than that. I think it's in 90 something.
Yeah, I think
can we just clarify what our contribution has been so we can thank you?
Yeah. So I need to take a vote. Folks, can we just take a vote on leaving it on the table? All those in favour, please, for the collation of extra information.
I'll move a procedural motion to let it lie on the table.
Thank you very much, Councillor Arbery and Councillor Clark. Thank you very much. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, abstentions and carried. Which leads us on to city parking. Attachment 12, pages 95 through 99 of your report. And just to alert you to the fact that option 1 is that which is currently appears in the draft AP. Happy to move option 1? Councillor Hollis has moved option 3. I will just read it and Councillor Kelly's seconding, is that correct? Which is free on-street parking with strict enforcement of time limits, i.e. reduction of revenue budgets, reduction of revenue of $100,000 per month, $1.2 million per year.
Move whatever motion you want, so this is just a guide, so...
What I'm intending to move is a motion that tests this and reports back pre-Christmas, as it says in F. So can we do this for a period of time, just to extend the COVID with a different way of operating?
Yeah, so the proposal for options 3 stipulates a cut-off at the end of November, so we would make an assessment at that point.
Yeah, thanks. Then I'll just move it as is.
So there are the recommendations, 12 and 13, and the paper. That a report be provided to Council prior to the 31st of November, or at that time. The report will include a review of the effectiveness of measures and include provision for any appropriate options ahead of the busy Christmas period, dependent on economic conditions.
resolution F and G. So if you put option 3, then we're suggesting you would also move resolutions F and G, which deal with
Yes,
that
indeed.
report back.
Yeah, which is your report that you would have. Yeah. Okay. So just to be clear in simple terms, this effectively aligns Tauranga with the Mount.
That's right.
Doesn't it? How does it not?
There is paid parking at the Mount.
Excuse me?
There is paid parking at the
is
Mount
it?
in May Street, council paid parking, yeah.
That's not on street. Well, on street.
Yeah, this is on street. Yeah, thank you. So, Councillor Hollis, would you like to speak to this? Who seconded this? Sorry, we're running off the rails a bit. Councillor Kitty, thank you. Would you like to speak to this now?
Yeah, this thing's been bouncing around for I don't know how many years, and it keeps coming up. And there's a pile of retailers that suggest it would be a great idea, and there's some that think that it's not a great idea because of the risk of people parking their vehicles there and then moving them and things like that. I'm not sure that's an actual problem. I'd love to see data, and I'd also, after this period, look to adding what Hamilton has done so that we can monitor parking habits properly and get some actual data on our city rather than perhaps guessing off anecdata. I see a couple of things with this as well, that as the COVID impact actually hits the city and actually hits retailers, we should be doing everything in our power to get people into the city, and parking is definitely one trigger we can pull. And it's probably time for us to up the ante. We've been replenishing this city and rejuvenating and making things wonderful for a decade or more. And this is just one piece of the puzzle that we can pull for a cost of a few $100,000 of lost revenue, and I think we should just get on with it instead of mucking it around.
Go to Councillor Kitty for clarification. What have Hamilton done? Just in case we're not all aware of it.
There's discs and things on the road that measure when vehicles drive onto them and off, and it's just a way of monitoring traffic movements and parking.
Thank you. Councillor Kitty.
I think also just in regard to Hamilton, my understanding is also that part of their CBD revitalisation scheme years ago was to have the free parking, quote me if I'm wrong, for 2 hours, and then quite a hefty charge on the third hour. I do understand that worked incredibly well and did help with the revitalisation of the CBD. My main concern here with paid parking down there is we all know that Tauranga CBD is suffering. The businesses are suffering. I have, and I've got to be careful how I term this, walked the streets of Tauranga on many occasions talking to the business owners. I'm just popping in, saying hello, seeing what their main concern is. As per the emails or text messages I've got from the people that I do know down there, and one of their biggest deterrents is no free parking down there. They think, they hope, they wish that if it was free, people would start coming back into CBD. I don't need to go on about the free parking at Bayfair or the Lakes or Papamoa Plaza, but this is where people are going at the moment because they do not need to worry about getting a park and they do not need to worry about paying for it. We need to do what we can, in my opinion, to help the local businesses here. And if it's not having to stress about free parking, that's great. I think a little thing that I would like to see, seriously, free 2 hours and then charge $100 for the third hour. I can guarantee that will ensure that people will move. Okay, and if they don't, great, we've got our revenue income back. I think we really need to, leading up to Christmas, get as many people into the CBD as we can, get people moving around here. If this is going to help our businesses, it is our job to help our community, it's our job to help our businesses. This is one way we can help. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kitty. Before we go to Councillor Morris, I just want to clarify the free parking length of time is currently 3 hours. Would be just in terms of what we're proposing here would be 3 hours because that is that correct? How the machines are organised, right? Is that?
No, so that's how it worked during COVID lockdown. So the proposal here is that we limit that to 2 hours. We saw some behaviour during lockdown, and that people got all day parking over the 6 hour period by just shifting their car once or moving their wheel half a revolution or however you choose to do that. But the point is that that is it's shortened to the 2 hours.
Right.
So
that's
in
key.
doing that, I guess it's an assumption, but what we're hearing from the retailers is that they want high utilisation, they want high turnover, and the way to do that is to prevent the all-day parking in the CBD at no or very small cost.
Very much, Nick. That's great clarity. Just to ensure that we're aware, we're talking about 2 hours with that change. Councillor Hughes, followed by Councillor Bullock. Sorry, I beg your pardon. We didn't hear from Councillor Morris before. Sorry about that. My apologies.
No, thank you. This is a tough one for me. I could have been convinced to agree with what's currently on the table, but the reality is, colleagues, in my view, we've already spent the money. And so I'm looking up there behind Nick and I see that number in terms of the total rate rise, and we have already spent the money. So if we had not have supported our place, then I would have been open to supporting this. If it was coming from the budget towards Tauranga Main Street, then I would consider this. Now, there is a very clear, couple of clear reasons why it couldn't come from downtown Tauranga. First of all, because we have a contractual obligation with them for 12 months notice. That's the first one. But secondly, it would also be morally unfair to give people a week's notice and then their funding dries up for the year. That would be morally unacceptable. But if we were in a world where that was possible and morally acceptable, then I would suggest that the funding should come from the Main Street rate from Tauranga, and I would suggest that it should have come from the Our Place decision. Because we've spent the money, I have to be financially prudent, so it's a no for me.
Going back to that order we had, Councillor Hughes, followed by Councillor Robson. I beg your pardon, Councillor Bulldog. Thank you.
I'm just wondering whether we've got any figures on whether we did up the over 2 hours parking, what it would take to bring this into some kind of balance, and also whether there's the possibility to talk to regional council on the back of that of making buses to the CBD free, so that people could use alternative transport if they wanted to get in to the city.
Yeah, so we don't have the evidence to that now. So without making a judgment or assumption about the effect of what free parking would have or the timing of it in terms of supporting businesses, is that what you're asking? Or is that as a lever for transport or public transport?
Oh no, so I think I was just asking if we put the price up of all-day parking, does that balance out our budget, and are we able to get? I don't know how much all-day parking there is comparatively, so or in the third hour plus, is there a possibility that then evens that out so that we could do this project till November at least, and then not hit the books?
Yeah, so there's, we were going to mention the increasing parking fees under fees and user charges, but we may have...
The next report, 10.3, covers user fees, which is consistent with the draft that there is already an increase proposed within there, and that activity is still in deficit after that increase. So the answer is that no, it won't offset.
Thanks very much, Paul and Nick. Thank you, Councillor. Sorry, Councillor Bulldog, and then Councillor Robson.
Yeah. Look, I can't support this. I think Councillor Morris's comment that we've already spent the money is not just related to what's on the board, but the account's in deficit. We're talking about $400,000 of potentially lost revenue here, because I don't believe having extra charges after the 2 hours free will get anything, because we have had some may not remember, and I imagine Nick may not because he wasn't here at the time, but when we went through this before, we had really good evidence that the parking was turning over within around about an hour. I can't remember the exact time. Most people coming into the city, staying for an hour, which is what the shoppers want, and they're gone. If you give them free parking, you're not going to make it up by having a higher charge after the 2 hours free. And I don't believe the 2 hours will stop those who commute from getting out and changing their cars every 2 hours. That they will see that as a great win, because there is parking spaces available and they can do it, and they save their day parking. And we've already seen that perverse behaviour. It's in the report from the trial we had during lockdown, or after lockdown. So look, I feel for the retailers. I wish we could help them. When you go and visit them, this is always the thing they'll tell you, because it's the number one thing they can pick on. But it's not saving people over at the Mount, I tell you. Shops are starting to close there because we are seeing a real impact on retail as an activity. And we have to look at subsidising that 400,000. We're asking ratepayers all over the city to subsidise this money here in the CBD, when many of them are not coming here. They're not benefiting from it. The idea that people will travel here because they're not paying $2 an hour, I mean, how much money have they got to shop? If it is in their minds that this is a barrier, well, I don't see it changing really. We've had trials before. We've done all we can. And the 3-hour time limit was requested by Main Street. I would be, happy to support anything that might work, but I do not believe that going to free parking will work. And once we extend this trial, it'll be very hard. Pull it back, and we'll be subsidising it for a long period of time.
Councillor Bullock. Councillor Robson.
Just clarify something. The parking activity is supposed to be self-funding. If the activity goes into deficit, how do we address that deficit normally? We normally don't rate fund the deficit.
Debt. It's loan funded.
It's loan funded. So, just for clarification, should there be a cost and we don't recover it with the suggested, albeit in jest, $100 an hour charge for the third hour, that would simply increase debt. It wouldn't have an impact on rates. Is that correct?
That's correct, and we would need to have a conversation around funding this activity through the long-term plan.
And that may encourage some people to think about how this might play out. I ask those questions because I think we do, and I'm sort of channeling Terry Malloy here to a bit, we need to do something for this environment, and I believe we have actually, not through malice, but through optimistic but ill-guided aspiration and courage and boldness, not helped our CBD. There are roads closed. We are proposing through other initiatives to close more roads. I see no harm in actually testing this. I did make an effort in previous triennium to go to Hamilton to understand why they have done what they've done and the impact of it. I noticed that Hamilton have actually chosen, after experimenting, to continue the experiment. They believe the evidence supports their approach. The difficulty I have is that to truly test what's going on here, we need two pieces of data, and there's no provision for either. One is we need to understand what's happening in the parking environment itself, and Hamilton put the CapEx in to do that, and I believe that's been rewarded with quality data. And the second thing we need is paymark data. We need to be measuring what's actually happening at the retailers, on a daily, weekly, monthly basis, and as ever, we don't seem to have access to the sort of data we need to make informed decisions. Or not as ever, as too often is the case. I'm of a mind at the moment, given there's no immediate rates impact, and given there is a parking strategy being worked on as a sort of perennial project, I'm of a mind to actually support this for some period of time, because I don't believe it puts us in jeopardy around our rates discussion, which is, I know, at the front of many people's minds. And I do believe there are still other discussions to have. I don't believe we've emptied the well in terms of finding other places to look. As a matter of fact, we've barely touched the surface in the discussions we've had today.
Thank you, Councillor Robson. We can get the Hamilton data easily, and it may be, good to do that sooner rather than later. Councillor Arbery, and I think Councillor Granger following. And Councillor Hughes.
Yeah, I'd be pretty hesitant to take that approach of let's just run a deficit, effectively throw it on the credit card because it doesn't impact rates. I don't think that's, if I've understood the financial arrangements right.
Is that an opportunity to clarify?
Well, yeah, open to advice there.
Sorry, okay, could you just repeat that? Sorry, I was...
So if we choose to just run this activity at a bigger deficit for the next few months, and that would be loan funded rather than being rate funded?
That's right, and just to point out that one of the reasons for the deficit is obviously the impact of Harrington Street's having on that activity.
Yeah. So yeah, I'll stand by my comment. I'm opposed to throwing operational things. This is basically going to the supermarket and throwing it on the credit card onto our debt. It's not financially good practice. If we want to put up or if we want to give people free parking, we should do that by putting up the rates, or by putting up rates for day parkers or commuters elsewhere in the network. I don't think we should be debt funding OPEX. I think that's a slippery slope.
Thank you. Councillor Hughes, I think. Thank you.
I won't be supporting this. I believe that we need to move towards different forms of transport to get people around. And I'd like to see our CBD, I have an aspiration for our CBD to have more green space and less parking. And in that case, we need to move towards having multimodal solutions. For free parking, in my view, doesn't hit us in the direction that we want to go.
Thank you, Councillor Granger.
Yeah, thank you. I don't know how many times I've been through this stage. I don't know. But look, admiration to Councillor Hollis, and it was a tough decision for me to make my mind up around this one, but the more I think about it and where we're at the moment, especially with the businesses here in the CBD, and we're trying to do the best we can for the CBD, and we all know that it's suffering in general. So what I'm intending to do is, yes, I will support this. It's going to come back to us prior to November 2020. I think this will be the last time I will support it. But again, just like Councillor Robson, Hamilton, I've been over there and they've extended that, they've continued it. So you've certainly got to take note on other cities of what they're doing and how well it's done there, and I think that's important to us here. There's only one thing I do want to mention. If this does go ahead, I want to make it very, very, very clear that we must communicate well to the people. Because sometimes this goes on a month, 6 weeks, sometimes 2 months, and people out there go, oh, I didn't know it was free. And that is important. So in other words, what we're doing here is if we go ahead and we are doing something, let's make sure that it is well known to the people out there. And I mean well known. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Clout.
Yeah, I share the sentiments expressed by Councillor Morris particularly, and also Councillor Baldock. This actually does add up to some $500,000 even just in the 5 months between July and November. So that's a significant impost on the ratepayer. Also, the on-street revenue, on-street parking revenue that we receive does actually help to fund our car park buildings. And we know that we've got potentially some significant R&M remediation to be done on some of our car parks. So I think this is actually a long-term plan discussion item, and I think that's the time and the place to really look at all of our options going forward. Thanks.
Very much. I just a question of clarification to start before my understanding is that the data from Paymart is available, if we just got to ask for it. And Main Street have been asking for the electronic data for some years, apparently, is that?
Asked this question yesterday, and hang on, I've just got the answer here. We had the data, but only to September 2019. Apparently, we cancelled our sub. I'm presuming that was a cost saving. I don't know why, sorry, but we don't have it beyond that date.
We can certainly get Hamilton. I'm sure Hamilton would share their data. I can't imagine why they would not. I mean, that's hardly competitive, so I'm sure Mayor Paula would be keen to do that. Councillor Bullock.
Ask a question because you've raised that issue of the electronic data. We have had that presented to us before about putting in these little things on the road. Does anyone up there at the front desk remember how much that is? It's quite expensive.
We did explore it in that parking paper, and there were a number of other pros and cons as well. But Jeremy, can you remember? Otherwise, we can pull that back out and recirculate it.
The safest thing to do is to find that paper again, because I don't remember it off the top of my head. No, I can't recall exactly what
We'll
it
put
cost.
on the parked whiteboard and we'll circulate it to you.
Okay, thank you. Very good, thank you. So, Council, if you have...
I'll have my right of reply, thanks. Thank you. I always enjoy when Councillor Baldock uses the word belief in a sentence, knowing that he doesn't care about data or evidence. Anecdata versus commuters. I would like to see some proper numbers around that. I mean, when I read the report, it showed some more anecdata but didn't have any clear numbers. And I don't believe that we will be flooded with a whole lot of baristas looking to move their cars every 2 hours so that retail shoppers can't get in. And I really want to cover the word subsidising. We're not subsidising the free parking on road. Those things have been paid for by ratepayers generations ago. The curbing and the channelling and even most of the paint was done years ago. And the reason we pay is to prop up car parking buildings that are being undercharged and underutilised or underperforming. And I think we can do a lot better with that. And as far as shops closing over at the Mount, I fully disagree. And if you go there in the evenings, you'll see what I mean by a different revitalisation. That place has got some vibe that Tauranga City doesn't have. And that's something to really bear in mind. Whether that's about the free parking or not, I don't know, but it's bloody hard to get a park over there at any time of the day. So something's working right. And the last point I really want to make is that perhaps we could knock 400k off Elizabeth Street and fund it with that. Anyway.
Very good. Thank you very much for the sum up. So, Council, putting to you option 3, together with F and G, and just bearing in mind that the time would change to a 2-hour free parking. So, all those in favour, please say aye. Can I just see a show of hands, please? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And against? Yeah. Yeah, I'm going to support it. So it's 6. It's carried. So that takes, thank you, Council. This takes us to sustainability. And what I'm going to recommend before we get into this discussion is that we do this one and then we adjourn until tomorrow and pick things up at 10.3, with your permission. Bless you, Dawn. So this is pages 100 to 105 of your notes, of your doc. And just to alert you to the fact that option 1 is the same as in the draft AP.
Happy to second. Happy to move.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hughes, seconded by Councillor Robertson. Councillor Hughes?
Oh, yeah. Is there any questions first from...
I beg your pardon. Is there any questions from councillors?
Sorry, which option was that, 1 or 2?
This is option two.
Option
two, which is the funding increase to $400,000.
Could someone from
Sorry,
the
Brett.
staff just talk to the extra 200,000 and the link between what the staff would be doing and with the sustainability board?
Through the chair, yes. So, in terms of the $200,000, that would be to carry on with through the annual plan. When we put the draft up, we talked about the strategy work and the tactical work, and the 200,000 that are put back in here into option 2 is to carry on with a tactical work that we had done to date, as well as then doing the strategy work for the additional $200,000, which was the original suggestion.
And that 200,000 was what was recommended we defer the first time round.
Yeah, that's right. So the first time around, the suggestion was to do the strategy work only, and that we would pull back on the tactical work, which is what we have staff or have had staff working on at the moment, without the sort of overarching strategy that we talked about at the time.
Thanks very much, Nick. Councillor Morris. Sir Baldock.
Thank you. Briefly, before I speak to the motion, I just give notice that I have 3 additional resolutions that I seek leave to move as part of 10.3. Happy to do that as the chair directs, whether it be at the end of this or tomorrow, as the chair wishes. But speaking to the motion, which is currently on the table...
we're just questions.
Oh, no, it was moved and seconded. Oh, you haven't spoken to it? No, of course you haven't. Good on you. Sorry. I was drawing, apologise.
And I just had a question before you speak, if I may. Just on page 101, the A, B, C, D of the proposal around the setting up of the sustainability, what was it called again? The ISB? No, there's something else. Just in that B, I mean, this is an external group. There's no elected members going on this group, is there? And the intentions, I mean, it's not finalised yet, but the intention that's expressed there is it's people in the community.
So the suggestion is that it would be external advisors, and what we're suggesting is that the role and scope of that is not it's not an annual plan issue. So this is about funding allocation. If you approve funding, then there will be a paper that will come to the policy committee with options about how you want to go about it, what role and scope is, what its work plan what the work plan in terms of sustainability strategy. You've also signed off the vision work the other day that had a whole lot of sustainability elements in it. So that paper would come back and you give direction, which seems to be the more appropriate location for it.
Just speaking to this, in a matter of a month or two, we're going to be starting to make decisions on the next 10 years of our city, and we currently really don't have good guidance around or a good framework or a good cohesive strategy around sustainability. Now, some people think of sustainability as just the green stuff like trees, etc. Sustainability is around the 4 well-beings. We're talking around looking towards what our city can do in both in the environment space, but also how that impacts socially, environmentally, and economically. So there's lots and lots of opportunities here that we can look across our organisation. If we have external input, there's some very, very good minds out there that can help us to guide us and put us into a place with the staff and with the community to where we can have something that's that's nationally recognisable, that opens massive opportunities, not only for our city, but also to attract the eyes and ears of government funding. We did note earlier there's $1.2 billion sitting there unspent in the environment space in government. There's lots and lots of opportunities here. If you're just obviously looking around the world, this is sustainability is the place that we all know we need to go. So if we can be really clear, front-footed, and as an organisation work with the best possible starting point that we can to look at our long-term plan, then this money is more of an investment than it is anything else.
Thank you, Councillor Hughes. Councillor Robson. Anyone else like to speak to this? Councillor Morris, followed by Councillor Hollis, and I think Councillor Baldock.
Thank you. I took off early. I unfortunately can't support this because a similar rationale to my previous speech, notwithstanding, I was convinced out of it by the debate around the table, which is quite nice that can happen from time to time. But no, I don't, because the money has already been spent. And what I'll tag it to this time is $200,000 Memorial Park walkway investigation. So I can't support the additional 200 to make it 400.
Councillor Hollis.
I won't be supporting this initiative either. I have a very strong understanding of the word sustainability, and I'm tired of the plastic use of it that's been shown over recent years. I feel that there's an ideology behind some of this that I fundamentally disagree with.
Councillor Baldock, followed by Councillor Clout. I don't think so, but he's happy to.
Okay, sorry. Look, I will support it. I'm pleased that we're increasing the in-house capability. The external advice will be helpful. As Councillor Hughes has said, the 10-year plan is big decisions for a 10-year window, albeit normally 3 years rolled over, but Councillor Granger might remember how often he and I have battled for such things, and I saw it mentioned in the report. I was trying to look for it, things like rainwater tanks under eaves and plumbing, so we can use rainwater for flushing toilets instead of all this stuff. That's the sort of stuff that I get really interested in. Many people know I battle trees occasionally, even though I've planted lots at my place and they grow lovely. But those things which I think really deliver on some good not only environmental outcomes, but just use of resources more sustainably. And I think there is a lot of talent out there in the community that can help us when we come to these decisions. I don't think we'll be making the decisions too soon. I think, LTP goes on and we do some initial decision making in general terms, but the real crunch comes into 2021. And if we have some assistance there, we will be benefited by it. I would also comment that perhaps in improving our decision making around sustainability, the best thing we can do is give voting rights to our iwi reps, I won't try and say it, but I can't right now. But they have demonstrated for a long time their commitment to sustainability, and I think they would bring great input to our committees in that regard. And I'm pleased that they're considered as members of the group that will be set up.
Thank you. Councillor Clout, followed by Councillor Granger. Did I miss you? If I did, I apologise.
Yeah, thank you. When we put this draft together, I was quite happy to move the $200,000 and into the draft budget, and I still believe that $200,000 should be sufficient, particularly to set up the external advisory group. Given that it will take a while to actually get it up and running throughout this financial year, and that will then allow us time through the long-term plan process to look at something more substantial. So I just feel that given the figure up there behind Gareth, which is only increasing, I think the $200,000 is sufficient at this point. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Granger, followed by Councillor Kitty.
You just come say that. Thank you, Councillor Bullock. In regards to the possibility in the future, which I'd like to certainly see, in the likes of rainwater tanks on all houses, it would be fantastic. But in this case, the point that Councillor Morris brought up, you know, I keep looking at that figure behind those two gentlemen over there, and I'm sorry to say, but I do think that $200,000 is sufficient enough, and that's why I'm going to follow on, and hopefully that will be the case. So I'm not supporting this.
Thank you. Councillor Kitty.
I am incredibly torn on this because honestly, I do believe option 2 is the best option for us as a city, but I am looking at that rising number behind us and I am gravely concerned. Okay, we have not seen the impact of COVID yet. That is still about to come pre-Christmas. I would have liked to have seen some of the other decisions not be accepted, but they have. That is something we have to live with. But as that 5.2, if it stands now, rises, I am deeply, deeply concerned. This would have been a project I would have accepted hands down over a lot of the others, like the cycleways. And again, I'm not going to bring up Liz Street again, but that is another one that if we could have just trimmed that back, I would be going for option 2, hands down, and some, especially for our community. But I can't see this figure keep rising and tell our residents this, our ratepayers, the ones that I am deeply concerned about, come November. So unfortunately, I can't support this, but I can support option 1.
Thank you. Councillor Aubrey.
You've
Aubrey, sorry.
taken after Calvin after there. I will be supporting this. It seems that at a high level at council, if we think about the 4 well-beings, there's a lot of emphasis, particularly on infrastructure, growth, getting pipes in the ground, getting roads put in place. Less on the social side. You know, we've got Kāinga Tupu now, which has given some impetus to that. We do a bit in our community centres, but they're quite sad. And on the environmental front, I think that's not a discussion that comes up often. I think this also, this is a long-term thing, right? So in the short term, it's going to probably make that figure look a little bit worse. But, you know, in 100 years' time, would this have been worth it? And even some of those tactical things, if you've got someone looking at energy efficiency, if they can find some savings, how much does that add up to over the next 30 years? So I think it's worthwhile casting sustainability lens over what we're doing, because at the moment we're not, by and large. So I think I'll support this just to put more impetus to some of those well-beings that seem to fall by the wayside with our growing city challenges.
Thank you very much. We haven't heard from Councillor Robson, I don't believe. You're reserved? Okay, right. Deputy Mayor Salisbury, would you like to speak on this, to this?
No, just to say that I think it is it's a long game, not a short game, and I think it is an important one to begin now. As much as I also, you know, like Dawn has already said, you know, just grappling with the timing of this is unfortunate with COVID, but I do believe it is something that we actually need to do now.
Thank you. Councillor Robson. Well, I can do. In terms of expediency, I'm going to support this. It is, Jaco actually said it all for me. It's a long game, and I don't think we do enough. And I know it's a very, very tricky time for all of us, but for the city. But at the end of the day, I think this warrants greater attention than it's had in Tauranga Moana. And I entirely agree with what Councillor Baldock said around the iwi relationship with this, and so it will get my support.
Right. There's a couple of things here I think we need to think about. That I'm very much against people greenwashing, charity washing, sustainability washing things. I think if you're genuine about this, you need to put your money where your mouth is, which is why those people who support rainwater tanks will be pleased to know that the scholarship I support at Waikato University this year gave $6,000 to a student investigating the economics of rainwater tanks in Hamilton. But that's kind of a good thing, but it's not good enough. That's just a one-off. We need to view this city through a sustainability lens. And the point made by the mover that sustainability isn't simply about planting trees or not cutting down trees, as Chainsaw Baldock occasionally wants to do. It's actually a bigger, deeper, more fundamental thing than that. And I at the risk of being seen to culturally appropriate, there's a phrase that's used by an incorporation effectively operating the top end of the South Island. And their ambition is to be great ancestors. It's to leave this place better than we find it. Not immediately for our children, because that can be a kind of selfish thing. People accumulate wealth to give their children a good run at this dog-eat-dog world, but actually to be great ancestors, to leave this place better than we found it for generations that we will never know, never speak to. And sustainability applies very much to the area of economics and economic development. And if you do what you've always done, you're not going to get a sustainable city. You're not going to have a sustainable country. I don't think it's any surprise that most of those countries that achieve well in the area of environment actually also achieve well in the area of economy. They're linked. Right? There's an enormous amount of waste. GDP can be a false figure. We all know the broken windows argument. If you want to generate more GDP in the city, just go and throw a few rocks through the windows of those empty businesses downtown, because the repairs will add to the GDP of the city. It's a pointless metric, or at least it's a metric that needs to be considered in the light of other metrics. This is important to me, really important to me. This money will repay itself enormously if we do it properly. Right? If we just try and wash things or pretend. And for those people who say we've already spent the money, we haven't. To me, this is an economic development issue as much as anything else. And we haven't discussed. We've discussed adding an additional 130, but we haven't discussed maybe redirecting some of our economic development money into a space where our economic development is sustainable. We are able to revise decisions we've made in the light of understanding where we are and where we've come. And it's unfortunate that this particular decision started or got its place in our decision-making process. It's such a linear process that the people at the end of the process wind up being shortchanged because earlier decisions weren't looking ahead, or weren't looking ahead as much as they should have. There's an irony in that, because sustainability very much is about looking a long way ahead, but some people struggle to look down the agenda. Cultural sustainability is important, and it's real, and that's why I would support Omanawa over the Visitor Information Centre every day of the week, every week of the year, and every year I remain a councillor. Sustainability is what effectively provides our legacy. It's the only thing that provides our legacy. I just want people to think the money hasn't been spent. There is more money to look at, or we can look again. If this is important to you, please consider your vote. Please consider your vote. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone. I'll put it to the vote, and just to be very clear, we are voting on option 2. All those in favour, please. Sorry, beg your pardon. Oh, sorry, Heidi, did you want the right of reply?
No, I think everybody's spoken really clearly. Thank you.
Much. Just reinforcing, we are voting on option 2 of the sustainability motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Can I just see a show of hands, please? So one.
Good on you, Steve. Love your work.
Too late, Steve. It's been recorded, and for some reason the delete button's jammed. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah. And against? Abstentions? 1 abstention with Councillor Kitty. 4 against. The motion is carried. Can I suggest we have I do apologise to my colleague Councillor Morris. I had forgotten his sheet, but you said three things. I just wonder if we could take a 5-minute break and in place, if you don't mind, so we're not disappearing and making it a 15-minute break, because we might just be able to do this in one hit and be out of here at 5:30. If we could just rally with you, Councillor Morris, and find out what it is exactly we're addressing here. Thank you. See you still here. We've got some. We've got a range of MPRs, as they've been called, Morris Proposed Resolutions. Can I, Steve, if you'd like to introduce them, perhaps. I'm just conscious that three of them are in 10.2, and 3 are also in 10.3. I'm going to suggest already that, I haven't really read them, Steve, but if we could take the 10.3s tomorrow as part of 10.3, and let's do the 3 10.2s and call it quits. Is that okay? All right, Steve, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you for your leave, Your Worship. I'm happy to move. If there's a second, or I'm happy to speak straight away to them.
What's on it all? If we just take 2 minutes to just... Okay. Councillor Morris, can I suggest that you speak to them one at a time? When we get to the rates postponement scheme, just so we're all on the same song sheet, we might get one of the exec to explain what that is. But if you could just step us through it, I think that would be really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just in terms of the first proposed resolution there, you'll note the staff advice at lunchtime was that there's insufficient time to create a spatial plan for Mount Maunganui before the LTP over the next 5 months. That is absolutely correct. That is not the intention of the resolution. The resolution is to request and issue an options paper on the development of a spatial plan for Mount Maunganui North. Now, Mount Maunganui North is a place which requires a spatial plan because we have issues like Te Papo and Namanu Poro Takataka, which may or may not, depending on different views, have been in place or appropriate. In terms of the one-way trial, may or may not be appropriate. One-way down Maunganui Road may or may not be appropriate. The streetscape, in terms of the old Project Phoenix in the 1990s, where people are frequently whacking their cars into those circular parking bays. Again, so a spatial plan is a plan which goes beyond just transportation or parking or streetscape. It does open the door to perhaps land use changes as well, although to be fair, that's not really the intention of this paper. It is more in response to Scott Brundle's submission in which he presented Mount Vision 2020. And so I think if we're going to have a proper spatial plan in Te Papa, which is essentially a land use plan change with some transportation elements, then we need to look at a spatial plan for Mount Maunganui North, less emphasis on the land use change, more on the layout of reserves, transportation, parking, etc. So that is what the intention of that is.
Very good, thank you. If you wanted to move that, and if we can get a second, perhaps we can get CJ just to talk us through the implications of a plan of that sort. So you're moving? I'm happy to second. Or you second it, Andrew. It's fine. CJ, thank you.
So we've been having conversations internally about the issues and options paper for the LTP, and spatial plans are certainly one of the things on the list, including spatial plans for the next second stage of residential intensification in some of the suburban areas. There are some locations of the city that have got significant challenges, and Mount North is one in terms of natural hazards. But in terms of centre revitalisation, the last time the council did anything was Mount Central and Cherrywood, probably over some 10 years ago. So this issue isn't isolated only to Mount North. You've got places like Mangatapu, Welcome Bay, Bethlehem. So probably would make sense for the paper to be more comprehensive as a sort of a scoping options for the council to consider.
Thanks very much, CJ.
Sorry, this might be a bit of a naive question, but can you define where Mount North kind of starts? Like,
Good question. There are several definitions of Mount North. One of them, which we found out in terms of DC collection when we were discussing what was then termed Phoenix Park, is north of Sunrise Ave. And I think if we were more au fait with that fact, then there were certain development contributions that may have been used elsewhere instead of transforming a car park. However, that being said, the Mount North area in terms of this is what I would term north of Gulf Road, personally.
It's a big chunk. Councillor Baldock.
Well, I could probably say it in the speech, but I won't have to. Obviously, you can't do a spatial plan without the hazards issues, which are significant. I was thinking Mount North, the old definition you were relating to. If you're going to Gulf Road, it's a bit different. But that's obviously going to be part of what we have to look at.
Thank you.
Just through you, Your Worship, for those councillors that were in attendance at the briefing the other day in relation to the city plan changes, you'll recall we actually talked specifically about this, and I think we used the Mount as an example, that as we go through the LTP and set funding aside for the city plan changes, there are a number of communities that we believe needed to go through a similar spatial planning process to that which we are currently going through with Te Papa. And so I think CJ's proposal that a paper comes back as part of the LTP process to dedicate funding for particular communities to go through that spatial planning process is something that we're committed to anyway. So a resolution will just obviously reinforce that.
Thanks very much, Marty. Is there any more questions or clarification before we... Thank you. Councillor Robson and Councillor Hughes.
It's, don't want to get into semantics, but there's not that many options for how you do a spatial plan. There's options for what this, these are the different plans that you could come up with. But the process for creating a spatial plan is pretty standard to a point.
I think there's a range of things. There's the geographical scope, which geographic locations in the city do you want to do it for, and then there's the nature of the issues that you're going to address. If you're thinking about Te Papa, it's dealt with land use, transport, there's a blue green corridors, there's a whole range of things. You might decide to make specific scope. So I've just asked the team, just on anticipation of this, broadly, what do they think it would cost to sort of do a spatial plan in another location? They're saying sort of 12 months to complete, a budget of 500,000 to 600,000, 2 FTEs without a business case, and then if you're seeking business case to get funding for investment from NZT, another 300,000. So they're quite significant investments if you're going to do a spatial plan that's aligned with something like Te Papa to progress residential intensification and transport initiatives to support it. If you wanted a scope that was different and more about just the public realm, then that's a different beast. So I think the scoping paper would need to, and if you've got more natural hazards, it's going to be more expensive and difficult than if you've got a location that doesn't have natural hazards. So they'd all come into the scoping paper for you to consider.
Thanks very much, CJ. Councillor Morris.
With your indulgence in response, it's certainly the latter of what Christine Jones mentioned, and I think one of the problems with planning in New Zealand is that we are manacled to Resource Management Act planning, and whilst the RMA was a world-leading document in 1991, it is certainly not these days. And so we need to look at the term spatial plan in a much broader context than your RMA land use planning changes as what we're doing in the Te Papa Peninsula. Probably looking at it more of the lens of Paul Davidoff and advocacy planning. But planning has certainly moved on from 1991 in terms of global literature.
Yeah, I think this resolution's fine, but I think any report that comes back needs to reflect the spatial planning approach that we're going to take either through the LTP or city plan change of the opportunities for other communities as well. So whilst it will include the amount, it needs to be, I think, broader, and that was the basis upon which we were going to seek guidance around the city plan changes in the future.
We're talking potentially doing an issues and option paper for something that may cost significant money. So if we're thinking about committing that amount of money, then this issues and option paper needs to be real and needs to address the issues. I'm struggling with the risks around this proposal, that if you narrow the scope, then clearly all the the non-intended consequences of something you haven't addressed. So you just run enormous risk with a narrow scope of that you do something at some level in some way that you haven't taken into account the other effects on things like traffic or density or air pollution or land use or whatever it is. So I'm struggling to see how we, because I don't want to just agree to a paper for a paper's sake and come back and then find that you've got to address everything because there's all these list of risks that if you narrow the scope you don't address. Is that a valid concern, or am I?
Well, my thinking of those types of issues would be raised in the paper that would say you could do this level of scope that would cover these things, that wouldn't cover these, would have these risks and implications, but you'd do it faster and cheaper. So it depends on what outcome you want to achieve. So we would canvass those issues, and then you would have a choice. It's like a a la carte menu of, you might choose for some locations, you might choose a program over 10 years to look at centres, and you might choose some more limited in scope and some are more extensive in scope. That would be your call.
Thanks very much, John and CJ. Heidi.
I'm just going to say that I think this is a great opportunity for community co-design and the opportunity too to have some of these fail-fast projects that, like the one we're trialling here, can inform this kind of process really well, because once you do something like that, then you need to look at it in the context of the overall plan of the area rather than in isolation. So that just allows us not to put something in stone until we've looked at something in the context of the whole area. So it would be a good process.
I'm sure Sam will be very pleased to hear you mention fast fail. Heidi, obviously you're reading the paper. Anybody else like to comment on this? So the motion, Councillor Arbery.
Yeah, have we started speaking to it yet? I understood we're still in question time, but...
Still seeking questions of clarification.
I'm ready to talk to it.
So, Steve, you've... so who seconded this? Andrew. Right, thank you very much. Do you wish to speak to it first, Steve and Andrew? Yako?
Yeah, very quickly. I think it doesn't matter whether we vote for this or against it, because in that open workshop we had on the planning, this work's already underway, and it's not happening at just Mount Wanganui North, it's also happening at other communities. So I'll probably vote in favour because we were going to get this anyways.
Thank you very much. Councillors, can I put the resolution to you, or is there more... Sorry, Councillor Kitty.
Yeah, I just want to have a wee conversation about this as well. I'm really excited to see that this has come up. If you saw a meeting that we were in yesterday for about 2 or 3 hours with Mount Maunganui residents, you would understand why. That will come out soon, but I couldn't be happier with having a look at what Steve's proposed here, so thank you.
Thank you. Can I put the resolution to you, Council? We're at 10.2A, XA. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Abstentions? 1 abstention, Councillor Robson, and carried. Councillor Morris, this moves us to XB. Set up the draft long plan combining development contributions. So just want to step us through that one. Thank you.
Very quickly, this is in response to, peace be upon him, the purchase submission, and there was previous work that was done by council in the past, and so it would be useful just circulating that work. So, yeah. Sounds
very sensible. I've taken these in parts, yeah, just so we can... So we would have, obviously, Councillor Morris has moved that. Councillor Robson, you'll second that? Thank you.
This is a really important area for us, and I think Mr. Purchase, spoke quite eloquently on this issue, it frequently comes up. I think, if nothing else, to bring the councillors of this triennium up to speed around the implications of the way we approach these topics at the moment and the implications of alternatives. Certainly it's an area of major reputational harm at the moment. We are frequently beaten up publicly in sort of, how can I put it, narrow benchmarking against other councils, which reflects a lack of understanding of why we are where we are and why our numbers look the way they do. I think this is a really important piece of work, not just for our councillors, but also for our community, and perhaps for all those people who are currently looking at buying or intending to buy in those new greenfield developments. They really need to understand this. I support it.
Thank you very much. Anyone else at this stage?
Yeah, I think it's
Bulldog,
good
thank
to
you.
bring it up. I think when we see the report and the date of it, we'll realise that some of the dialogue from the submitter that raised it is a little bit askew on this dating, given that the development contributions came in 2002. But it's definitely worth relooking at it. We're one of the few councils that has the split. And so let's bring everybody up to speed, and it's an LTP discussion, I think.
Very good, thank you. I'll put it to you then, Council. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, abstentions, and carried. Which leads us to XC, submission 835, Steve.
Thank you, and thank you for your indulgence in these three matters. Submission 835 was by Peter McKinlay, and so he has outlined there his view of a, well, quite lightly, but his view of a rates postponement scheme. Now, that's not the same kind of objective of having our current rates postponement scheme, whereby you have a landowner with a high value property and they just very low income and cannot afford to pay their rates. This is more around it being an alternative funding mechanism for some of the more visionary projects that our city in time does need.
Can I ask a question, Steve, through you to Steve? There's just no timing on that, Steve. Is that are you talking about that leading into the 10-year plan as well, or the LTP?
I think it would be best to be, yeah.
Yeah, if that's clear, then I'm happy to support.
Thank you. So, Steve, you've proposed. Larry, your support. Thank you. Paul, do you want to make a couple of, wheels are falling off, sorry about this.
Just make a brief comment. We have brought this, a paper on this at the last, I think it was the last long-term plan. Our issue has always been the debt trade-off that actually occurs with any sort of scheme, because the money needs to come. But what I can say is we are working at a national level. The timing of that is a little bit unclear as to, and it's still unclear as to, and will it progress? But that type of scheme would basically be an off-balance sheet solution for this. That aware of a number of councils that do have such a scheme, but unaware of any that have had any success in terms of any uptake rate based on the current way those things operate. But we are looking at other alternatives as well.
Very good, Paul. Thank you. So, just to be very clear, Steve's moved. Larry, you're seconding. Are there any other discussion, councillors?
Steve would be first. You're going to speak to it? I mean, it's worth bringing it back to the LTV. I didn't agree that we had to dust or get the rust off, because it's a live issue amongst our team that trying to pursue this for some years, and it is going to, as Paul just said, dependent on potentially a national scheme that would have really solve some of the problems. But it's worth having a look at as we get into the LTP.
Thank you excuse me. Thank you very much. So, Councillor, I'll put it to you. This is 10.2 XC. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, abstentions, and carried. Thank you very much. Steve, with your indulgence, if we could move 10.3 into tomorrow with the other 10.3s. So, yeah, thanks, Robin. Thank you. Thank you, CJ.
So we'll just quickly go through the issues that are parked on the whiteboard so we can remove the ones that we've been dealt with. So you asked for information on Elizabeth Street future years cost. That's been emailed to you and a copy to Sam. The Te Tumu 200,000, that's been emailed to you. Bay Oval Trustees was covered in the open session. The previous parking paper has been emailed to you. You asked how much Film Bay Plenty had been spent in the past, 75,000 for each of the last 3 years. You asked who else has confirmed funding for the film. Rotorua 54,000, Western Bay 18,200, Taupo 15,000, Apotiki 2,500. Still waiting confirmation. Whakatane 15k, Kaurau 2.5k. I'll email that to you. But so that's that question. There was a question about curbside startup costs.
Yeah, so curbside startup's just under 3 million in the current financial year, so that would be 300,000 a year over the 10-year period of rate funding.
So we've got a couple of outstanding things that we haven't been managed to get. One is you've parked the funding application resource, so that was the conversation about that communities funding, and we've still got to come back to you on the level of council investment in prior years in Bay Oval. So those are the only two things that are remaining on the whiteboard, plus the matters that you've parked by procedural motion that's sitting on the right-hand side of the screen.
Thanks very much, Christine and team. I'll close the meeting. Councillors, thank you very much. Staff, executive, Sam, thanks for sticking with us all the way through. Meeting is adjourned until tomorrow morning at 06:30.